Hi guys, and welcome to Gentle History for Deep Sleep. Tonight we step into a Montana winter, where the sky is darkening, the wind is sharpening, and a small cabin waits somewhere ahead beneath the snow. You're not looking at this scene from a warm sofa, you're in it. Your boots sink past the ankle, then past the calf, and each step makes the next one feel slightly less reasonable. Pine trees groan above you. Loose powder slips from their branches with a soft whisper, while the open ground shines pale under the last blue light of evening. Somewhere beyond that white curtain stands your shelter, assuming the storm has not hidden it completely, and, to be honest, without preparation, luck, and a stubborn refusal to lie down in the nearest drift. You probably will not survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from, and what the local time is where you are. Now, dim the lights, and let the room around you fade as the trail disappears beneath your feet. You trudge forward with your chin tucked into your coat collar, though the collar is already stiff with frost. Each breath forms a cloud that blows sideways before you can watch it vanish. The snow does not fall politely. It crosses the land in slanting sheets, racing low over the ground like pale smoke when you lift your face. Tiny crystals strike your cheeks with a sting of thrown sand. The country around you is wide, but tonight it feels narrow. The storm reduces the world to a few yards of visible ground. A dark line of timber, and the uncertain shape of your own hands, a mile through deep snow, carrying a bedroll, a small sack of food, and the knowledge that darkness is approaching becomes a private negotiation between you and every muscle in your body. You keep moving because stopping is colder. Your boots are heavy with packed snow. Leather absorbs dampness, seams harden, and the warmth of your feet slowly leaks away. Wool socks help, but they are not magic. Nothing in this landscape is magic, except perhaps the strange ability of wind to find the one gap in your clothing that you thought was closed. It slips beneath your scarf and down your back with the intimacy of an unwelcome relative. You search for landmarks, a split pine, a low ridge, a creek bed hidden beneath white drifts. In summer, the route would be obvious. In winter, the snow edits everything. It smooths ruts, fills hollows, softens rocks, and creates a new landscape over the old one. The land you remember still exists, but you can no longer see it. That is one of the quiet dangers of frontier travel. Often it is simple uncertainty, followed by fatigue, followed by one poor choice made because you are too cold to think carefully. You pause beside a cluster of juniper and listen. The wind fills your ears, but underneath it you hear branches rubbing together, farther away. An animal may call, though snow makes the sound strangely muffled and difficult to place. The last daylight has thinned into a dull silver band behind the clouds. Night in a snowstorm does not arrive all at once. It gathers. Tree trunks lose detail. Drifts look solid until your leg sinks through them. A small hollow appears harmless until you step into it and feel snow rise to your thigh. You pull yourself free, slowly, saving your strength. Your breathing grows louder. Your shoulders ache beneath the straps of your pack. The cabin should be close, and the words should be encouraging, yet they become more frustrating each time you repeat them. The cabin should be close. Many settlers in Montana reached remote claims during the later 19th century, drawn by land, mining, ranching, timber, or the hope that distance might offer a new beginning. Under the Homestead Act of 1862, eligible claimants could seek 160 acres of public land if they lived on it, and improved it for the required period. The promise sounded generous. The reality demanded labour, endurance. and a tolerance for loneliness that no government form could measure. Historians still argue whether the popular image of the fiercely independent frontier household reflects daily reality, or hides how deeply survival depended on neighbours, kin, hired hands, and shared knowledge. Tonight, that debate feels less academic. You would gladly trade a portion of your rugged independence for someone standing ahead with a lantern. You move on. A gust tears loose a veil of snow from the ridge. You turn your back to the wind, protecting your face. Snow rattles against your coat. Your fingers, even inside mittens, feel thick and clumsy. When the gust passes, you lift your head and notice a dark shape where no dark shape stood before. At first it could be a boulder, then it becomes a roof line. The cabin is almost swallowed by the slope behind it. Snow has gathered against one side and curled over the roof. Only the upper portion of the front wall is clearly visible. The doorway is a darker rectangle beneath a shallow drift, and beside it a narrow window reflects no light. You have found it. Relief weakens your knees and brings a foolish desire to sit down. You resist. A cabin seen is not yet a cabin reached. You push toward the building, lifting your legs high, planting each foot firmly. Near the wall, your shins strike something buried, perhaps a chopped log, and you stumble forward with a grunt that the storm immediately carries away. Beside the door, a strip of bright cloth hangs from a peg beneath the eave. It marks the entrance when drifting snow changes the shape of the building. Frontier households turned ordinary scraps into signals, seals, ties, patches, and tools. A quirky practice in some cold regions was to fasten a vivid rag near a doorway so travellers would not waste strength digging at the wrong wall. It is not elegant, but elegance rarely keeps you alive. You brush snow from the latch. The metal bites through your mitten, the door resists, held by packed snow along the threshold. You lean your shoulder against it and push. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the drift breaks with a soft crumble, and the door opens inward just enough for you to squeeze through. Cold darkness receives you. The air inside is still, carrying faint smells of old wood, ash, and wool. You drag your pack across the threshold and force the door shut. The storm becomes a distant roar. You stand without moving, listening to your own breath. Snow melts along your collar, your hands tremble, partly from cold, partly from relief. Outside, the trail has vanished completely. Inside, you have walls around you, a roof above you, and one long winter night waiting in silence. You are not warm yet, but you have arrived. The stillness inside does not mean safety. It only means the wind is now arguing with the cabin instead of with your face. You set down your pack and wait for your eyes to adjust. Slowly. The room emerges from darkness. The walls are made of rough logs, laid one above another, each surface showing the marks of an axe. The timbers are not smooth, and they are not meant to be. They are thick enough to carry weight, strong enough to resist weather, and local enough that no wagon has needed to haul them across half a territory. You run one gloved hand along the nearest wall. The wood is cold, but it does not feel as cold as the iron latch. That matters. Wood slows the movement of heat better than metal. Though a single wall of logs is hardly a perfect barrier, every crack between the timbers is a path for winter air, and winter air is patient. The gaps have been packed with chinking. Some of it is clay mixed with grass. Some looks like mud reinforced with chips of wood. In places, narrow stones have been pressed into wider openings before the softer material was added. The work is uneven. One section is firm and nearly smooth. Another has dried, shrunk, and split into thin lines. You lean closer and feel a faint thread of cold against your cheek. There it is. A tiny draft enters through a crack no wider than a fingernail. It seems harmless, almost delicate, but across an entire wall, dozens of such gaps can drain warmth from a room. A cabin can look solid while quietly leaking heat from every seam. In much of 19th century Montana, settlers built with whatever material the landscape offered, in forested country. Logs were the obvious choice, where timber was scarce. People used sod, stone, milled lumber when it could be afforded, or combinations that would make a modern builder pause, rub the chin, and quietly update the insurance policy. A mainstream historical fact is that many early log structures in the northern Rocky Mountain region were constructed from locally felled pine or fir, shaped with hand tools and joined at the corners with notches. The exact notch varied. Some builders cut simple saddle shapes. Others preferred squared joints that required more time but produced tighter corners. Skill mattered, but speed mattered too, especially when weather approached. You move toward one corner and inspect the overlapping ends of the logs. They project beyond the wall like stacked arms. Snow has pressed against the exterior, so a faint cool dampness touches the inner wood. The notch appears crude but firm. It has held through more than one season. Researchers continue to dispute whether frontier cabins were generally built as temporary shelters that later became permanent by necessity, or whether many families intended from the beginning to improve them gradually over years. Above you, the roof beams cross the room in dark lines. Thin boards, perhaps split by hand, rest over them. The roof slopes enough to shed ordinary snow, but this storm is not offering ordinary snow. Wind has driven powder into a heavy ridge along one side. Snow can insulate a roof by trapping air, yet too much becomes a dangerous load. You listen. A soft creak moves through the timbers. The pitch of a cabin roof is more than a matter of appearance. A steeper roof encourages snow to slide. Though sliding snow can bury a doorway or strike anyone standing beneath the eaves. A flatter roof is easier to build and uses shorter supports, but it collects weight. Builders balance labour, available materials, wind direction, and experience. There is no single perfect design, only a series of choices made with an axe, a saw, and the hope that winter will be reasonable. Winter, naturally, has not agreed to be reasonable. You lift a small stool and place it beneath a dark patch near the rafters, standing carefully. You touch the underside of the roof. The boards feel dry. That is encouraging. A leak would bring moisture into bedding, clothing, food, and firewood. Wet possessions in deep cold become less like possessions and more like personal enemies. A quirky detail of cabin construction is that some settlers stuffed cracks with old cloth, moss, animal hair, paper, or even worn socks when proper chinking failed. The wall might contain yesterday's newspaper, a strip from a flour sack, and one sock whose partner had already disappeared into frontier legend. It is not refined insulation, but the cold does not inspect your materials for dignity. You step down and move toward the window. It is small, because glass is expensive, fragile, and poor at holding heat. The single pane is rimmed with frost from the inside, around the frame. The carpenter has fitted thin strips of wood, but one corner has opened. You press folded cloth into the gap. The floor is made from broad boards, each one rough beneath your boots. Through the gaps comes the earthy smell of cold soil. Some cabins had floors of packed dirt, particularly in their earliest months. A raised wooden floor offers comfort and distance from mud, insects, and ground moisture, but it also creates a space beneath where cold air can travel. You crouch and hold your hand near a seam. Another draft. The building is full of invisible streams. Cold slips under the door, through the floor, around the window, between the logs, and down the chimney when the air pressure changes. Warmth, once created, rises toward the rafters and searches for a way out. You've entered a slow contest between fire and structure. For now, the structure is losing. You examine the door from inside. It is thick, built from vertical planks held together by horizontal braces. The edges do not meet the frame evenly. Someone has nailed a folded strip of blanket along one side as a seal. You smile at the practicality of it. A fine blanket is useful on a bed. A damaged blanket can become a draft stopper on the frontier. Objects rarely retire. They change careers. You push gently against the door. Wind presses back from outside, making the latch tremble. The hinges hold. The braces hold. The frame gives a little, then settles. This cabin is not elegant. Its walls are scarred. Its roof groans. Its floor leaks cold through narrow seams. Yet every mark tells you that hands have repaired it, adapted it, and kept it standing. You begin removing snow from your shoulders, careful not to let it melt into the floorboards, before warmth, before food, before sleep. You must understand the shelter around you, because tonight, the cabin is not merely where you stay. It is the thing standing between you and the whole white weight of Montana. The white weight outside is still gathering, grain by grain, while inside you begin the quiet work that should have been finished before the first hard gust arrived. You remove your mittens only long enough to flex your fingers and inspect the room properly. The cold reaches them at once, sharpening every joint. This is not the moment to admire the cabin. It is the moment to make the cabin ready. Your first concern is the door. You lift the wooden bar resting beside the frame and slide it into its brackets. The iron latch might hold, but the bar gives the door another layer of resistance against wind, drifting snow, and anything else that might press from the darkness. Then you kneel and push a rolled strip of old cloth along the threshold. Cold air still curls around it. But less than before, the window comes next. Its frost has thickened into cloudy feathers. You pull the interior shutter across the glass and secure it with a simple wooden peg. The room becomes darker, yet darkness costs less heat than exposed glass. You can live without a view for one night. The storm, after all, has not prepared anything worth seeing. You check the second shutter, which is smaller and slightly warped. It refuses to close neatly. You press it into place and wedge a spoon handle between the frame and the wall. The spoon has now become part of the architecture. Frontier life is full of promotions like this. Around the cabin, you gather what can be gathered before your hands grow clumsy. An axe leans near the chopping block. A shovel rests beside the rear wall. A wooden bucket stands near the stove. A lantern hangs from a peg, its reservoir holding only a little oil. You move each item within easy reach. This seems almost too simple to matter, but in severe cold, distance changes. A tool stored 10 steps away can feel like a tool stored in another county. If snow traps the door, if the chimney blocks, or if the fire dies, you do not want to search through darkness while your fingers lose feeling. A mainstream fact of frontier winter life is that households often prepared fuel, food, and animal feed well before the deepest cold. Autumn labour was not merely seasonal tidiness, it was a calculation of survival. Firewood had to be cut, split, dried, stacked, and protected. Flour, beans, salt, preserved meat, and root vegetables had to last through periods when travel became impossible. You cross to the woodpile stacked along the interior wall. It is smaller than you hoped. The lower pieces are dry. The upper pieces carry a dusting of snow that must have blown in when the door opened. You brush them clean and separate the driest logs from the damp ones. Dry wood belongs nearest the stove. Damp wood can wait and slowly lose moisture in the warmer air. Assuming you manage to create warmer air, you count the pieces without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. It is never pleasant when firewood becomes arithmetic. Near the back wall sits a box of kindling, thin pine strips, bark curls, and a few bundles of dry grass fill the bottom. You test them between your fingers. They snap rather than bend. Good. A fire can forgive many things, but it does not forgive wet kindling. You inspect the match tin next. It contains fewer matches than any reasonable person would like to discover during a Montana storm. You close the lid carefully and place it on a shelf above the stove, far from damp boots and careless elbows. Scholars remain divided over how well prepared many isolated settlers truly were for severe winters. Some surviving diaries describe careful planning and abundant stores. Others reveal households caught short by early storms, failed crops, poor transport, illness, or simple misjudgment. Memory often celebrates the prepared survivor and forgets the neighbour who guessed wrong. You turn toward the food cupboard. Inside, you find a sack of flour, a jar of beans, a small measure of cornmeal, coffee, salt, onions, dried apples, and a wrapped piece of smoked meat. None of it looks luxurious, but luxury is a flexible idea. After walking through a storm, an onion begins to seem almost aristocratic. You lift each container and estimate its weight. The beans will last. The flour is low. The coffee is precious, though not essential, which is exactly why it feels essential. A small tin of baking soda sits in one corner. Beside it lies a twist of paper containing dried herbs. A quirky household habit in some frontier cabins was to hang strongly scented herbs near stored food, partly for flavour and partly in the hope of discouraging mice. Whether the mice felt discouraged is doubtful. They usually treated such efforts as thoughtful seasoning. You check the water bucket. A skin of ice has formed across the top. You break it with the handle of a wooden ladle. Beneath, the water is clear and bitterly cold. There is enough for drinking and cooking, but not enough to waste. Snow can be melted if necessary. Though it yields surprisingly little water, a large pot of loose snow collapses into a shallow pool, one of winter's less generous tricks. Clean snow from away from the roof is best. Snow gathered near the cabin may contain ash, bark, animal tracks, or whatever has drifted from the chimney. You place an empty pot by the door for later collection, then you look upward. The chimney pipe disappears through the roof, and the draught opening is visible near the stove. You cannot yet tell whether the chimney is clear. Outside, snow may have crusted around the cap. Before lighting a serious fire, you will need to test the drawer carefully. You take the shovel and lean it against the wall beside the door, blade facing inward. If the entrance becomes buried, you must be able to reach it before opening the door. Leaving the shovel outside would be the sort of mistake that feels obvious only after the snow has sealed it away. You also place the axe nearby, though not so near that a sleepy foot might find it. A coil of rope goes beside the lantern. A blanket is folded over the chair. Spare socks are hung from a peg. Your food bag is lifted from the floor and suspended from a beam where mice will have to work slightly harder for their supper. The cabin begins to feel less like an abandoned box and more like a defended position. Still, something bothers you. You listen again. The wind pulses against the walls. Snow scratches softly at the shutter. From the roof comes a muted sliding sound, followed by a heavy sigh as part of the drift settles. You walk once around the room, checking each corner, door secured, shutters closed, tools ready, fuel sorted, food counted, water guarded, bedding still dry. Preparation does not remove danger. It simply makes danger less surprised to find you waiting. At last, you take one dry stick from the pile and kneel before the black iron stove. The cabin has been inspected, sealed, and supplied as well as the moment allows. Now you need warmth, and warmth, like nearly everything else tonight, will demand constant attention. The iron stove waits in front of you with the calm indifference of an object that has no intention of helping. unless you perform every step correctly. You open its small door. A stale breath of soot and cold ash reaches you. The firebox contains the remains of an older blaze, grey flakes, blackened wood, and a few pale lumps that crumble when touched. You clear most of it with a flat scoop, leaving a thin bed of ash across the bottom. Too much ash can choke the air. Too little can make a new fire harder to steady. Even here, comfort depends on balance. You arrange the materials carefully. First, a twist of dry grass, then curls of bark, then the narrowest pine splinters, crossed lightly so air can move between them. Above those, you place 2 thicker sticks with enough space for flame to climb. The match tin clicks open. You choose one match and pause. A match is a tiny thing to hold so much responsibility. You strike it against the rough strip. The first attempt gives only a faint scrape. The second produces a brief flare that nearly disappears in the moving air. You cup your hand around it and lower it toward the grass. The flame catches. It travels through the dry strands in a soft orange line. Bark begins to curl. Pine resin warms and releases a sharp, clean scent. A thin thread of smoke rises, bends toward the open stove door, then hesitates. You watch closely. If the chimney is drawing properly, the smoke should move upward through the pipe. Instead, some of it slips into the room. You feel it sting your eyes. The chimney is cold, and the heavy column of air inside it resists the warmer smoke below. You roll a scrap of paper, light one end, and hold it high inside the firebox. The quick heat warms the pipe and encourages the draft. Smoke trembles, then suddenly lifts. The chimney has begun to pull. You add another splinter. The fire makes a small cracking sound, almost polite. Soon it becomes livelier. Flames fold around the kindling, brightening the black interior of the stove. You close the door most of the way, leaving the air control open. This type of cast iron stove became increasingly common in 19th century homes because it used fuel more efficiently than a wide open hearth and allowed better control of heat in remote regions. However, stoves were costly to transport. Iron had to travel by rail, wagon, riverboat, or some uncomfortable combination of all three. A household fortunate enough to own one guarded it carefully, repaired it when possible, and accepted that it would dominate the room like a very squat, very demanding monarch. You sit back on your heels and listen. The stovepipe ticks as the metal begins to warm. Each sound is small and precise. Tick. Pause. Tick. The cabin does not become comfortable at once. Heat first gathers around the stove body, then spreads slowly into the surrounding air. The walls, floor, tools, and furniture are all cold enough to absorb it. You hold your hands near the iron, not touching it. Warmth reaches your palms, faint but unmistakable. Then the flames weaken. You open the door and add a slightly larger stick. It smoulders at one end. Dampness hidden inside the wood turns to steam, producing a soft hiss. The fire recovers, though reluctantly. People studying frontier households disagree about how often families underestimated the amount of fuel required during severe northern winters. Written records usually mention wood gathering as routine labour, but routine does not mean easy. A small cabin might consume a remarkable pile over a long cold season, especially if the walls leaked air and the occupants cooked on the same stove. The wood near you has been cut into lengths short enough for the firebox. Some pieces split cleanly, others are knotted and uneven. You take the axe and set a thick log on the chopping block inside the cabin. Indoor chopping is not ideal. It sends chips across the floor and invites accidents. Yet stepping outside into the storm is even less appealing. You steady the log, raise the axe only a short distance, and bring it down with control. The wood splits with a hard snap. The sound fills the room and fades into the muffled storm beyond the walls. Fresh pine scent rises from the pale inner grain. You split each half again, making smaller pieces that will catch more easily and burn more steadily. A curious piece of domestic knowledge passed between cold-weather households involved reading the sound of burning wood. Sharp popping might suggest trapped resin or moisture. A dull hiss warned of damp fuel. A lively crackle usually meant dry kindling and good air. The stove became an instrument, and experienced listeners learned its moods without needing to open the door every few minutes. You add one split piece and adjust the damper. Too much air sends heat racing up the chimney. Too little causes smoke, soot, and weak combustion. You cannot simply fill the stove and forget it. You must tend it, observe it, and make small corrections. The iron gradually changes from cold black to warm black. No glow is visible, and that is good. A glowing stove body can mean dangerous overheating. You move the nearest blanket farther away. Sparks are unlikely to leap through the closed door. But unlikely is not a word you rely upon tonight. You inspect the stovepipe joints. A faint grey wisp escapes from one seam, then disappears as the draft strengthens. You make a note to watch it. Soot can collect inside the pipe, narrowing the passage and increasing the risk of a chimney fire in a buried cabin. Even ordinary smoke becomes more threatening because snow may block exterior openings. The room is warmer now. Though warmth remains uneven near the stove, your face feels almost comfortable. At your back, cold still settles from the wall. Your boots begin to soften as the frozen leather loosens. Moisture darkens the floor beneath them. You remove the outer layer of your coat and hang it where heat can reach it without scorching the fabric. Steam rises faintly from the shoulders. The smell is a mixture of wet wool, smoke, leather, and cold air, which is not exactly perfume, but it is the scent of survival going reasonably well. You prepare fuel for the night in separate piles, thin pieces for reviving the fire, medium pieces for steady burning, thick pieces for longer heat. The largest logs will not last until morning without attention, but they may give you an hour or two before the stove needs feeding again. That is the difficult truth. Sleep will come in fragments. You will wake when the room cools, when the fire settles, when the stove gives a different sound, or when instinct whispers that the flame has gone too quiet. Each time, you will rise from the bedding, cross the dark room, open the iron door, and offer the fire another piece of the carefully counted pile. For now, though, the first true warmth reaches your knees. The stove hums softly, the chimney draws. The cabin begins to release its stored cold, inch by inch, while the storm presses snow against the roof and walls. You place another log inside, close the door, and watch the narrow line of flame through the vent. The fire is alive. Keeping it alive will shape every hour that follows. The fire is alive, and almost immediately it asks what else you expect from it. Warmth is only one duty. The stove must also dry your clothes, heat your water, cook your supper, and avoid filling the cabin with smoke while doing all of that at once. You look at its flat iron top and understand why a single appliance can become the centre of an entire household. You set a small pot over the hottest plate and pour in water from the bucket. A thin skin of ice clings to the rim, melts, and disappears beside the pot. You place a heavy pan and let it heat slowly. The cupboard offers no feast. You choose beans already softened from earlier soaking, one onion, a small piece of smoked meat, and a scoop of cornmeal. You slice the onion on a worn board. Its sharp scent cuts through smoke and wet wool. Your eyes water. Though whether from the onion or the stove is difficult to say, you trim the meat into small pieces, saving every bit of fat. Nothing is thrown away when the nearest store lies beyond miles of snow. The pan gives a faint hiss as the first piece touches it. Fat begins to melt, spreading a glossy layer across the iron. The smell changes the room at once. Smoke, pine, and damp clothing now mingle with salt and meat. Your stomach, quiet from cold and effort, suddenly remembers its purpose. You add the onion. It crackles softly. Steam rises and curls toward the rafters. Moisture gathers on the window frost behind the shutter. A drop forms along the frame and slides downward. Across many remote 19th century households, daily meals relied on durable staples such as flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, dried fruit, coffee, and preserved vegetables. Fresh food depended on season, location, livestock, gardens, and luck. Winter reduced variety, but it did not remove skill. You stir the onions with a wooden spoon, or rather, with the spoon that has not been recruited to hold the shutter closed. When the onions soften, you add the beans and a little water. The pan answers with a rush of steam. You cover it with a lid that does not quite fit. Fuel governs every choice. A dish that cooks for hours may taste wonderful, but it also consumes wood. You cannot behave as though the pile beside the wall is endless. Researchers of Western domestic life continue to question how monotonous winter diets truly were. Supply lists suggest repetition, yet letters and household accounts reveal improvisation. Barter, preserved garden produce, wild foods, and recipes adapted from many cultural traditions. The record is uneven, because people rarely pause during supper to document exactly how interesting the beans were. You pour cornmeal into the warming water, slowly, stirring to prevent lumps. It thickens almost at once. The spoon drags through the mixture with increasing resistance. You add salt, then a small dab of meat fat. One curious kitchen practice involved placing a covered pot inside a box or basket packed with hay, blankets, or cloth after bringing it to a boil. Trapped heat allowed food to continue cooking without constant fuel. It was a useful form of retained heat cooking when wood was precious. Tonight, however, you want supper soon, and you're not yet willing to lend your blankets to the beans. You shift the pan to a cooler part of the stove. Cast iron does not offer numbered controls. You regulate temperature by moving cookware, adjusting the fire, and judging heat with your hand held cautiously above the surface. A splash of grease snaps against your wrist. You pull back and whisper a complaint that remains suitable for a family audience, though only just. The cabin smells richer now. The beans have absorbed smoke and onion. The cornmeal gives off a warm grain scent. You cut one dried apple into thin pieces and place them in a cup with hot water. You consider coffee. You measure a small amount and add it to a pot. Frontier coffee was often boiled directly in water, sometimes with eggshell or cold water used to settle the grounds. When supplies ran short, people stretched or replaced it with roasted grains, roots, peas, or whatever else could be browned and persuaded to look convincing in a cup. The result may have resembled coffee in colour more than spirit. Steam fills the upper room, bringing another problem. Moisture can make the cabin feel warmer briefly, yet it settles into bedding, clothing, and walls when the fire weakens. That dampness turns cold. You open the stove draft slightly and allow the chimney to pull more air through the room. The meal's ready before you've prepared a proper place to eat. You clear the small table, moving the match tin rope, and one lonely mitten. Your bowl is chipped along the rim. Your spoon is smooth from years of use. You serve the cornmeal first, then the beans and meat over it. The food sends warmth into your face. You wait, because burning your mouth would be an irritating achievement after surviving the storm. The first bite is soft, salty, and smoky. It is better than it has any right to be. You eat slowly. Outside. Wind pushes snow against the logs with a dry brushing sound. Inside. The spoon touches the bowl with a small, regular tap. Each mouthful eases the hollow feeling beneath your ribs. Heat moves outward from your stomach, adding its quiet contribution to the stove. The dried apple follows. Its sweetness is faint, which makes you notice it more. The coffee is dark, gritty, and strong enough to suggest that someone has dissolved a minor argument in hot water. You save the remaining food in the covered pan. Nothing should stay exposed. Mice, dust, and falling soot are all eager diners. Then you face the washing. Water is too valuable to waste, so you scrape the bowl clean with a piece of cornmeal crust. A little hot water loosens the grease. You wipe the pan with cloth and keep the rinse water for dirty tasks. The room now carries the full perfume of winter shelter. Cooked beans, coffee, smoke, wet leather, hot iron, onion, pine, and the faint animal scent of wool. It is not fresh air, but it is inhabited air. Supper has done more than feed you. It has warmed the cabin, settled your breathing, and turned a dark room into a temporary home. Yet the heat does not reach every corner. When you stand, air near the floor touches your ankles like cold water, reminding you that before sleep, you must decide how much clothing you're willing to wear beneath the blankets. The cold near the floor settles round your boots, and the question becomes less about what you will wear to bed than what you can remove without regretting it. You begin with the outer coat. It hangs beside the stove now, releasing little threads of steam into the room. The shoulders are still damp, and the hem carries a crust of melting snow. You turn it so the wetter side faces the heat, careful to keep the wool far enough from the iron. Scorched cloth has a sharp, unforgettable smell, and tonight you do not need your clothing to become another form of fuel. Beneath the coat, you wear a heavy wool shirt over a lighter linen one. The wool scratches at your neck, but it also holds warm air close to your body, even when slightly damp. It continues to offer some insulation, which is one reason wool became so valuable in cold climates. Linen beneath it helps absorb perspiration and keeps the rougher fibres from rubbing directly against your skin. You lift one arm and feel the shirt tug where sweat has dried along the seam. The long walk through the storm warmed you while the air tried to freeze you. Now that you're standing still, that moisture becomes a problem. Damp fabric conducts heat away from the body faster than dry fabric. The lesson is simple, though not always pleasant. You must avoid sweating too heavily in the cold, and if you do sweat, you must dry what you can before sleeping. You loosen the wool shirt and let air reach the linen beneath. The change feels chilly at first, then warmth from the stove spreads across the fabric. In 19th century North America, layered clothing was common among people working outdoors in severe winters. Wool coats, flannel shirts, knitted stockings, mittens, scarves, and caps were practical defences, while underlayers of linen, cotton, or wool helped manage moisture and trapped air. Clothing varied greatly with income, occupation, community, trade access, and personal skill. But the principle of layers was widely understood. You sit on the stool and begin untying your boots. The leather has softened near the stove, though the laces remain stiff. You pull one boot free and immediately smell the result of a long day sealed inside it. The aroma is warm, sour, and impressively determined. You place the boot upright near the stove, but not too near. Leather dried too quickly can crack. A boot left wet can freeze solid by morning. The correct distance is somewhere between ruined by heat and transformed into a small leather monument. Your stocking is damp around the toes. You peel it off and examine your foot. The skin is pale and wrinkled, but not dangerously numb. You rub it gently with a dry cloth, then pull on a fresh wool stocking from the peg. The clean fabric feels soft and almost luxurious. The other foot receives the same treatment. Dry socks before sleep are not a minor comfort. They are one of the most valuable things in the room. Specialists in material culture continue to debate how consistently rural households possessed enough spare winter clothing to keep dry garments available. Estate lists sometimes show multiple coats, stockings, blankets, and caps, while personal accounts describe patched clothing worn until almost nothing remained. What you own depends on wealth, household labour, trade routes, and whether mice have recently developed an interest in your best sock. You hold the damp stockings near the stove for a moment, then hang them on a wooden peg. They steam faintly. Your trousers are thick and serviceable, with patches at both knees. Beneath them, you wear long drawers. The combination is warm enough while moving, but once you lie still, the fabric alone will not protect you from every draft in the cabin. You decide to keep both layers on. Modern sleep advice may encourage loose clothing, fresh sheets, and a cool bedroom. Your bedroom is certainly cool. In fact, it is ambitious about being cool. The rest of the advice will have to wait for another century. You inspect the sleeves of your shirt. One cuff is damp, so you roll it back slightly around your neck. You retie a softer cloth rather than the heavy scarf used outside. It stops cold air from slipping down your collar and helps hold warmth near the chest. Then you find a knitted cap. It is plain, slightly stretched, and smells faintly of smoke. You pull it over your ears. Heat escapes from any uncovered part of the body, and although the old claim that most body heat leaves through the head is exaggerated, a warm cap still matters when the rest of you is bundled and your head is exposed. A curious winter custom in some households was to warm a sleeping cap near the stove before putting it on. The pleasure lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes could feel wonderfully civilized. You try it now, holding the cap near the iron before returning it to your head. The result is immediate. Warmth closes around your ears. You sigh. There are small luxuries that cost almost nothing, provided you remember them at the right moment. You cross to the bedding and lift the top quilt. It is cold to the touch. The fabric carries a faint scent of dust, cedar, and old smoke. You shake it once, gently, then drape it over a chair near the stove so the outer chill can soften. The cabin still has distinct climates. Near the stove, your cheeks are warm. Near the door, the floorboards breathe cold air. At shoulder height, the room feels tolerable. Above, warmth gathers beneath the rafters, where it is of excellent use to no one. You consider moving the bed closer to the stove, but distance protects bedding from sparks and excessive heat. A safe sleeping place is warm enough to endure and far enough away not to ignite. Again, survival depends on a compromise. You add another layer to your clothing, a sleeveless wool waistcoat that fastens across the chest, traps warmth around your core without making your arms too bulky. Then you wrap a narrow strip of cloth around your lower back, where the chill seems to settle whenever you stand still. Your mittens remain nearby. You may wear them later if the fire weakens. Sleeping in mittens makes every midnight task more awkward, but cold fingers are worse. You place them beneath the edge of the blanket so they will stay warm and easy to find. The outfit is not elegant. You have wool over linen, patched trousers, long drawers, 2 dry stockings, a waistcoat, a neckcloth, and a cap pulled low over your ears. You look less like a romantic frontier hero and more like a laundry bundle that has learned to walk. That is perfectly acceptable. Romance is rarely useful at 3 a.m. when the stove needs wood. You sit near the fire and allow the layers to gather warmth. Fabric softens against your skin. Your feet begin to tingle as circulation returns. Outside, the wind presses steadily against the shutter. Inside, the stove clicks, the damp clothes steam, and the quilt waits beside the heat. Before long, you will arrange the bed itself, tightening what sags, shaking what has flattened, and discovering exactly what generations of sleepers considered acceptable comfort. For now, you pull the warm cap lower, stretch your hands toward the stove, and let your clothing become the first small cabin you carry around your body. The little cabin you carry around your body is warm enough for the moment, but the larger one around you is vanishing. You hear it first. Snow brushes the wall with a steady whisper. Then comes a heavier sound near the roof. A slow compression followed by a dull thump as another layer settles. The storm is not merely passing over the cabin, it is reshaping the building from outside, covering corners, sealing gaps, and pressing white weight against every surface. You move to the shuttered window and lift the wooden peg just enough to look through a narrow opening. At first you see nothing but pale grey. Then your eyes find the slope of snow rising almost to the lower edge of the frame. When you arrived, the window stood above the drift. Now the drift is climbing. Wind does not spread snow evenly. It carries loose crystals round walls, over ridges, and beneath eaves, then drops them wherever the air slows. One side of the cabin may remain partly exposed while another disappears beneath a deep bank. The building becomes an obstacle in a moving river of powder, and the river piles itself against the logs. You close the shutter again. Oddly, some of this is useful. Snow contains trapped air, and trapped air slows heat loss. A thick drift against the outer walls can act as insulation, reducing the bite of the wind and helping the cabin hold warmth. The lower drafts may weaken. The room may even feel quieter. That does not mean you should celebrate being buried alive with a cup of gritty coffee. Snow can insulate, but it can also block doors, cover windows, choke vents, bend roof supports, and hide the building from anyone searching outside. You cross to the door and press your ear against it. The storm sounds farther away now, muted by the growing bank. When you push gently, the door moves less than it did before. Packed snow is gathering against the outer planks. The door opens inward, which is fortunate. An outward opening door can become useless under a heavy drift. Yet even an inward opening door presents trouble. Open it too early, and loose snow may collapse into the room. Wait too long, and the packed bank may become dense enough to resist the shovel. Cabin builders in snowy regions often considered door direction, roof angle, and likely drift patterns when choosing a site. Though urgency sometimes mattered more than ideal planning, a doorway placed on the sheltered side could remain accessible longer, while one facing the wind might disappear with impressive speed. You lift the shovel and scrape near the threshold, making sure no tools or loose wood will block you later. Then you tie the rope around the shovel handle and secure the other end to a wall peg. It seems excessive until you imagine dropping the tool into loose snow and watching it vanish just beyond reach. One unusual practice reported in some northern settlements was keeping a long pole inside near the entrance. If the doorway became buried, the pole could be pushed through softer snow to test depth, locate open air, or mark a tunnel. It could also reveal whether you were digging toward the surface or merely making a determined hole in the wrong direction. You find such a pole resting along the rafters. It is smooth, light, and taller than you are. You bring it down and lean it beside the shovel. The cabin gives another creak. This one comes from above. You look toward the roof beams. They remain straight, at least as far as you can tell in lantern light, yet every new inch of snow adds weight. Dry powder is lighter than wet snow, but wind can pack it tightly. Temperature changes can turn soft layers into dense slabs. Researchers still disagree about how often roof failure threatened ordinary frontier cabins during severe winters, partly because surviving accounts emphasize disasters, while routine maintenance leaves fewer records. Some roofs collapsed, many did not. Between those outcomes lay labor, local knowledge, and a great deal of nervous listening. You place your hand on one upright support, no vibration. You listen again. The stove ticks, the wind murmurs, somewhere overhead. Snow slides a few inches with a faint rushing sound and stops. You imagine the roof outside. Its dark outline is probably gone. Snow has filled the angle between the slope and the ground behind the cabin. Smoke from the chimney must now rise through a hollow in the drift before reaching open air. That chimney concerns you most. A blocked chimney can force smoke and dangerous gases back into the room. You cannot see the cap from inside, but you can watch the draft. The flame remains steady. Smoke does not leak from the stove door, for now. The passage is open. You take the long pole and tap gently near the ceiling around the chimney pipe, listening for movement. Then you check the pipe joint you noticed earlier. It remains dark and dry. The room has grown noticeably quieter. Snow muffles sharp sounds and absorbs echoes. The roar outside becomes a deep pressure rather than a voice. Your own steps seem too loud. Even the spoon touching the bowl has a private, enclosed quality. There is comfort in that silence. There is also isolation. A buried cabin can feel protected from the world, wrapped in a thick white blanket. But blankets are usually lighter and less likely to collapse the roof. You inspect the walls again, along the buried side. The draft through the chinking has nearly vanished. The snow outside is sealing the gaps more effectively than the cloth or clay. Near the floor, cold still rises through the boards, but it feels less restless. You add a log to the stove and watch the flame take hold. Warmth helps keep your judgment clear. Panic wastes energy. So does unnecessary digging. You need to decide when to act and when to wait. For now, you wait. Opening the door during the strongest part of the storm would invite snow inside and expose you to wind. Climbing onto the roof would be worse, in darkness. With poor visibility and deep drifts, one step could carry you over an edge hidden beneath powder. Instead, you prepare. The shovel stays beside the entrance. The pole rests within reach. The rope is tied securely. You clear a path from bed to stove and from stove to door. You place the lantern where one hand can find it in darkness. Then you return to the window. This time, the glass is almost entirely covered. Only a narrow strip near the top shows the dim blue of the storm. Snow presses against the pane in soft curves, and tiny grains sift through the outer frame. You close the shutter carefully, feeling the weight on the other side. The cabin is no longer standing in the landscape in the ordinary way. It is becoming part of the landscape. Logs, roof, snow, and earth merge into one low shape beneath the night from a distance. No traveller would see a house. They might see only a rise in the white ground and a thin thread of smoke. If the wind allowed it, you stand in the centre of the room and feel the strange change. The snow makes the cabin warmer. The snow makes the cabin darker. The snow makes the cabin quieter. And the same snow that protects you is slowly closing every path out. And the same snow that protects you is slowly closing every path out, including the paths the cabin itself needs in order to breathe. You notice the change in the fire before you fully understand it. The flame behind the stove vent no longer rises with the same eager pull. It bends, flattens, and briefly retreats as though an unseen hand has pressed down upon it. The iron door gives a faint puff. A ribbon of smoke slips from the edge, curls into the room, and disappears near the rafters. You straighten at once. The room has become warmer, but the air feels thicker. Smoke adds a bitter taste to the back of your throat. Your eyes begin to sting. None of this is dramatic yet, which makes it more dangerous. A cabin can become unhealthy quietly, without a sudden crash or a theatrical cloud rolling across the floor. You open the stove draft a little farther. The flame brightens, then hesitates again. Fresh air must enter the cabin for the chimney to draw properly. Hot gases rise through the pipe, but they cannot continue leaving unless replacement air finds a way inside. Earlier, drafts slipped freely through the chinking, the door frame, and the window. Now snow has covered many of those gaps. The cabin is warmer because less cold air enters, yet the stove is beginning to compete for the limited air that remains. You move to the door and pull a small section of cloth away from the threshold. A blade of cold enters immediately. The flame answers. It lifts and steadies. There is the bargain. To keep the room breathable, you must allow some winter inside. Iron stoves offered frontier households better control and greater fuel efficiency than open fireplaces, but they also required sound chimneys, regular cleaning, and dependable ventilation in a tight or snow-covered structure. Poor draft could send smoke back into living space. The same improvement that made winter life more manageable introduced new ways for things to go wrong. You kneel beside the stove and watch the fire through the vent. Its movement tells you more than the warmth does. A strong upward pull suggests the chimney remains open, a lazy flame, repeated smoke leakage, or a sudden change in sound may warn that snow, soot, ice, or shifting wind has affected the draft. You hold a thin scrap of paper near the stove opening. It leans inward. Good. Then it flutters toward you. Not so good. Wind pressure above the roof may be forcing air down the chimney in brief pulses. Snow is probably built around the outer pipe, changing how air moves across the cap. The cabin is now buried deeply enough that the chimney may sit within a trough or pocket rather than in clean moving air. You cannot see any of this. You can only read the signs below. There is a strange bit of old household practice involving a candle flame. People sometimes watched whether the flame stood tall, leaned sharply, or behaved erratically near doors, vents, and stove openings. It served as a crude indicator of moving air. Of course, bringing an open flame close to curtains, bedding, or dry wood creates a second problem while investigating the first, which is a very frontier style of efficiency. You light a short candle and place it on the table, well away from cloth. The flame bends toward the stove. Air is moving across the room, though slowly. You crack the door inward by the width of 2 fingers. Snow presses against the outer side and spills through the gap in a fine powder. Cold air rushes low across the floor. The candle flame straightens. The stove draws more strongly. For several breaths, you hold the door there. The effect is immediate but uncomfortable. Your ankles chill. The room loses some of the warmth gathered over the last hour. Still, the smoke clears and your eyes stop watering. Experts continue to differ over how frequently smoke inhalation and combustion gases harmed people in isolated cabins, because many incidents were never recorded clearly. A death might be blamed on illness, exhaustion, exposure, or a failed stove without anyone identifying the exact cause. The surviving evidence is incomplete, and the air leaves no diary. One invisible threat is carbon monoxide, produced when fuel burns without enough oxygen. It has no colour and no smell. Smoke may warn you that combustion is poor, but clean-looking air does not guarantee safety. Headache, dizziness, weakness, confusion, and unusual sleepiness can appear before a person recognises the danger. That last symptom is especially cruel in a room where you're already tired. You pause and assess yourself. Your head feels clear. Your breathing is steady. The heavy feeling in your limbs comes from walking through deep snow, not from sudden weakness. You do not feel dizzy when you stand. Even so, you refuse to trust comfort alone. You leave a narrow gap at the threshold by folding the cloth back upon itself. The draft is small but constant. It travels along the floor toward the stove, where the fire consumes it. The room cools slightly, yet the flame burns cleaner. You inspect the stovepipe once more. Soot has darkened the joint, but no fresh smoke escapes. You tap the metal lightly with the wooden handle of the shovel. A dull sound answers. Heavy soot can narrow the pipe and sometimes ignite, producing a fierce chimney fire. Tonight is not the time for enthusiastic chimney cleaning, but you need to know whether the passage is worsening. You listen for a roaring sound. Nothing. Only the controlled murmur of flame. Outside, wind shifts around the buried roof. The stove reacts with a brief inward breath, then recovers. You imagine snow swirling above the chimney cap, alternately clearing and covering its edges. The temptation is to climb out and inspect it. You reject that idea. The storm remains too strong. The roof may be slick, the drifts uneven, and the edge impossible to see. You could fall, lose the shovel, damage the pipe, or become stranded above a door that has sealed behind you. Instead, you make the cabin breathe in small, deliberate ways. You open the door briefly every so often. You keep the threshold vent clear. You avoid filling the stove too tightly with damp wood. You watch the candle and the fire. You listen for changes in the pipe. You place the lantern lower than before, where its flame may reveal shifting air near the table. The room no longer feels sealed. A faint stream of cold travels along the boards, passes beneath the table, and disappears into the stove. It is not pleasant. It is reassuring. You sit down and breathe slowly through your nose. The air carries smoke, onion, coffee, wool, and pine. But it no longer bites your eyes. The stove burns with a steady orange glow. The chimney continues to pull, for now. The hidden passage to the outside remains open. That narrow column of moving air is as important as the door, the roof, and the walls. Without it, the cabin becomes a trap even while the fire keeps burning. So you accept the cold line at your feet. You accept the need to watch. And while the snow deepens above you, the cabin inhales through one small gap and exhales through the dark iron pipe. The cabin inhales through one small gap and exhales through the dark iron pipe. While you turn at last toward the bed waiting in the dimmer corner of the room. Calling it a bed is generous. It consists of a wooden frame, 4 legs, several cross pieces, and a web of rope stretched from side to side. Over that rests a mattress tick filled with straw. 2 quilts lie folded at the foot, with a fur spread beneath them and a rolled blanket serving as a pillow. You press one hand against the mattress. It gives with a dry rustle. The sound is not unpleasant. It resembles wind passing through summer grass. Though the resemblance becomes less poetic when a stiff stalk pushes through the fabric and scratches your palm. You lift the mattress tick and examine the rope beneath. The cords cross in a loose grid. Some remain tight, others sag toward the floor. When you press the center, the whole arrangement dips like a tired hammock. A person who has spent the day walking through deep snow may be willing to sleep almost anywhere. But even exhaustion has standards. You find the free end of the rope tied around a peg at the frame. The knot is stiff, yet it loosens after some effort. You brace one boot against the wooden rail, pull the cord tighter, and work along the frame. The ropes creak as tension returns. Beds supported by ropes were widely used in North American homes before metal springs became common. The rope foundation held a mattress filled with straw, corn husks, feathers, wool, or other available material. It needed regular tightening because natural fiber stretched under weight and changed with moisture. You pull again. The frame answers with a low groan. There is a limit to how much force old wood should receive. You stop before the bed becomes a pile of historical evidence. You retie the rope and test the center. It still yields. But more evenly now. The mattress will no longer fold you slowly toward the middle like a letter. You lift the straw tick by one corner and shake it. Dust rises into the lantern light. Tiny pieces of straw shift within the cloth, gathering in one end. You turn the mattress, beat it gently with both hands, and spread the filling back into the thin areas. The ticking is made from tightly woven fabric intended to keep the contents inside. It has been patched more than once. One patch is square and careful, another is shaped like no known country and attached with hurried stitches. A tiny straw point emerges through a seam. You push it back inside and rub a scrap of beeswax along the thread. The repair will not last forever, but neither will the night. Researchers who study domestic life continue to disagree about how comfortable ordinary rural bedding truly was. Inventories list mattresses, blankets, feather beds, and quilts. But such records rarely describe sagging ropes, insects, dampness, smoke, or the exact emotional effect of sleeping beside someone who snores with the confidence of a sawmill. You spread the straw tick across the tightened ropes. It settles with another dry whisper. The filling beneath your hand feels uneven but supportive. Straw is firm, inexpensive, and locally available. It can be refreshed when it breaks down, though fresh straw must be properly dried. Damp filling turns cold, smells musty, and encourages mould. You bend closer. The mattress smells of dust, old grass, wood smoke, and the faint human scent of many nights. It is dry. That is what matters most. On top of the tick, you place a folded wool blanket to soften the harder ridges, then you spread the fur over it. The fur is worn thin in several places, its outer guard hairs are coarse, while the underlayer remains soft near the edges. It traps air well and creates a barrier between your body and the mattress. A curious feature of some frontier beds was the use of heated stones, bricks, or metal warming pans placed beneath the covers before bedtime. The warming pan, where available, held hot coals and was passed carefully between the sheets. It could make a frozen bed inviting, though one loose ember could also make the bed exciting in an entirely different way. You have no warming pan. You choose a smooth stone from beside the stove, where it has been absorbing heat. You wrap it in cloth and test it against your wrist. Warm, not scorching. You place it near the foot of the bed beneath the blankets. The quilts come next. The first is heavy, made from pieces of faded cloth stitched into simple blocks, dark blue, brown, cream, and a red that has softened with age form a pattern across the surface. Some pieces may have come from worn shirts, dresses, sacks, or scraps too small for another use. Quilting turned fragments into insulation. Layers of fabric enclosed a filling of wool. Cotton, or whatever, could be spared. Then lines of stitching held everything together. A quilt was practical, but it could also carry memory. A sleeve from one garment, a patch from another, a pattern learned from a relative, all joined into something that rested over sleeping bodies night after night. You smooth the quilt across the bed. The second is lighter and slightly smaller. You place it on top where it can trap another layer of air. Then you prepare the pillow. The rolled blanket is not luxurious, but it supports your neck. You loosen it, shake it, and roll it again with a dry shirt inside to create a softer center. The result is lumpy, though less aggressively so. You sit on the edge of the bed. The ropes stretch and complain. The straw shifts beneath you. The frame holds. You lean back cautiously and lift your feet onto the mattress. The warm stone touches your socks through the blankets. Heat spreads slowly around your toes. For one beautiful moment, the bed seems almost comfortable. Then a straw stalk finds the back of your shoulder. You reach beneath yourself, adjust the mattress, and try again. Better. You arrange the covers so they can be pulled around your neck without leaving gaps at the sides. Cold air enters anywhere the bedding lifts from the body. You tuck the lower edge around your feet and fold one quilt beneath your legs. This creates a small pocket of warmth. The principle is simple. Your body heats the air trapped in the bedding. Thick materials slow the escape of that warmth. The bed does not produce heat. It preserves what you bring into it. That is why climbing into bed while chilled can remain miserable for a long time. You sit near the stove first, letting your clothes gather warmth. You rub your hands, flex your toes, and wait until your skin no longer feels cold to the touch. Then you return to the mattress. The stove stands several paces away. Its glow reaches the lower wall, but the bed remains in shadow. This distance reduces the chance of sparks reaching the quilts, though it also means the air here is cooler. You pull the fur and quilts over your legs, weight settles across you, The straw crackles softly beneath your back. The rope foundation bends just enough to cradle your body. The warm stone rests near your feet like a small captured sun. You're still wearing your wool layers, your dry stockings, and your sleeping cap. Your mittens wait beneath the edge of the quilt. The rolled blanket supports your head, though one corner presses against your ear. This is not comfort as a modern bedroom understands it. There is no soft spring mattress, no smooth sheet, no thermostat, no quiet mechanical hum promising steady heat until morning. There is rope, straw, wool, fur, and your own careful arrangement. Yet as the bedding closes around you, the cabin feels different. The bed creates a smaller shelter within the shelter, a warm hollow shaped exactly by your body. You listen to the stove, the wind, and the soft settling of straw. Soon, you discover that you're not the only creature interested in this warmth. Soon, you discover that you are not the only creature interested in this warmth. The first sign is not a bite, it is a sound. Something scratches inside the wall near your head, pauses, then scratches again. The noise is delicate but deliberate, like a tiny person trying to open a locked cupboard with very poor tools. You remain still beneath the quilts. The scratching moves upward between the logs. A faint rustle follows, then silence. You tell yourself it is only the wood settling. The wood, apparently, has learned to chew. You lift your head from the rolled blanket and listen. The sound returns from the corner where your food bag hangs from the beam. It is quicker now, accompanied by tiny taps against the wall. A mouse, perhaps two, perhaps an entire committee. Mice found frontier cabins attractive for the same reasons people did. The structures offered shelter, food, nesting material, and protection from severe weather. Gaps around floors, doors, roofs, and chinking gave them easy entry. Once inside, they could live behind walls, beneath boards, and among stored supplies. You slide one hand from beneath the quilt and reach for the lantern. The air outside the bedding is colder than expected. Your fingers protest immediately. The lantern flame grows as you adjust the wick. Light spreads across the cabin, shadows retreat from the table, stove and cupboard, near the hanging food sack. Nothing moves. You wait. A small grey shape appears on the beam. It freezes. You freeze for several seconds. You and the mouse study one another with equal suspicion. Its whiskers tremble. Its black eyes reflect the lantern. It looks well fed, which is not a compliment to the cabin storage arrangements. Then it races along the beam and vanishes behind a roof support. You lower the lantern. The food is tied high, but mice climb rough wood with ease. Hanging a sack discourages them only if the cord and beam offer no accessible route. This beam offers several. The mouse has probably inspected the arrangement more carefully than you have. You rise from the bed and cross the room, keeping the quilt around your shoulders. The result is less like a fearless settler and more like a nervous curtain learning to walk. You inspect the sack. A corner bears two tiny marks, not a hole yet. You move the food into a lidded wooden box and place a smooth metal plate beneath it. The plate may make climbing harder. You also remove crumbs from the table and sweep bits of cornmeal from the floor. Food storage in isolated homes required constant attention. Grain, flour, dried fruit, meat, candles, soap, leather, and cloth could all attract animals or insects. Containers made from tin, ceramic, glass, or tightly fitted wood offered protection, but many households owned fewer secure vessels than they needed. The mouse scratches again, now from beneath the floor. You return to the bed as you settle onto the straw tick. Another sensation reaches you, a faint movement near your ankle. You pull your leg back. Nothing appears. You wait. Then feel a small prick against the skin above your stocking. This is not a mouse. You throw back the upper quilt and inspect the bedding by lantern light. At first, the patchwork surface looks harmless. Then something dark and flat crawls slowly along a seam. A bed bug. It is small, brown, and shaped almost like an apple seed. It disappears into the stitching before your finger can reach it. Bedbugs have lived alongside human beings for thousands of years. They hide in cracks, furniture, bedding, and walls, emerging to feed while people rest. Cabins, inns, ships, barracks, and crowded houses all offered suitable habitats, especially where bedding moved between occupants. You lift the edge of the mattress tick and examine the seam. More dark specks appear near the stitching. Some may be dirt, some are probably not. Your tired body would like to pretend none of this exists. Your skin disagrees. A peculiar remedy found in old household advice involved placing strong-smelling herbs, leaves, or powders around beds in the hope of repelling insects. Tansy, mint, wormwood, and other plants were sometimes tucked into straw mattresses. The scent may have made the bed smell fresher. Whether the bugs respected the arrangement is another matter. You find the small twist of dried herbs from the cupboard and crush a little between your fingers. The smell is bitter and sharp. You rub it lightly along the outer edge of the mattress, fully aware that the bedbugs may interpret this as seasoning. More practical measures include heat, sunlight, boiling water, cleaning seams, replacing infested straw, and sealing cracks. Tonight, you have limited water, no sunlight, and no desire to empty the entire bed onto the floor during a storm. So you improvise. You remove the top quilt and shake it near the stove, keeping it well clear of the flame. You inspect the folds, brush away anything you see, and turn the quilt over. Then you lift the straw tick and beat its sides with a cloth. Dust fills the air. The mouse inside the wall becomes quiet, possibly out of professional respect. Students of domestic history remain uncertain about how openly people discussed insect infestations in private homes. Some diaries complain freely about fleas, lice, and bedbugs, especially during travel. Other records remain silent, perhaps because such pests were too ordinary to mention or too embarrassing to preserve in writing. You lay the mattress back down and smooth the blanket over it. The problem is not solved. It is merely negotiated. Near the floor, another creature moves. A small spider crosses the boards and disappears beneath the bed frame. You decide to leave it alone. Any animal willing to eat insects has earned temporary citizenship. You climb back beneath the quilts. The bedding has cooled while you worked. You find the wrapped stone near your feet, still faintly warm, and press both socks against it. A bite begins to itch near your ankle. You resist scratching. Scratching makes the skin warmer and the irritation more noticeable. Instead, you press the cloth gently over the spot and breathe slowly. From the wall comes another rustle. From the mattress comes nothing you can hear, which is somehow worse. You imagine the hidden life of the cabin. Mice travel through gaps behind the logs. Insects wait inside seams. Spiders hunt beneath furniture. Moths may rest among wool fibres. Tiny beetles may inhabit the wood. Every layer of shelter contains another resident. Modern bedrooms conceal much of this from view. Sealed walls, fitted screens, treated fabrics, and regular cleaning reduce the number of visitors. Here, the boundary between indoors and outdoors is thinner. Snow keeps the larger animals away. The smaller ones are already inside. You pull the quilt tightly around your neck and listen to the mouse make another journey along the beam. It stops above the food box, perhaps disappointed by your improvements. Then comes a tiny metallic tap as one paw touches the plate. Silence follows. You smile despite yourself. The cabin may belong to you for the night, but the older residents have not accepted your authority. They scratch, crawl, explore, and wait, and beneath the layered quilts, you learn that frontier sleep is rarely solitary. Even when no other human voice can be heard, frontier sleep is rarely solitary. Even when no other human voice can be heard. You lower the lantern wick until the flame becomes a small golden bead. Shadows gather again beneath the table and along the rafters. The mouse remains somewhere above you, but its movements fade into the larger collection of noises surrounding the bed. At first, the storm seems almost silent. Snow has covered much of the cabin, softening the wind and sealing the walls beneath a thick layer of white. The furious weather you crossed earlier now reaches you as a low, distant pressure. It is like hearing the sea through several closed doors. Then your ears begin to adjust. A roof beam gives a long creak. The sound starts near the chimney and travels slowly across the ceiling. It rises in pitch, pauses, and ends with a quiet knock inside the wall. You hold your breath until the cabin settles again. Wood changes with temperature and moisture. Timbers shrink in cold air, swell with dampness, and move under weight. Joints tighten or loosen. Nails pull slightly against boards. A cabin can speak all night without anything being truly wrong. Knowing this does not prevent you from listening. Another creak comes from the corner above your feet. You picture snow pressing against the roof. You imagine the beam bending, though the lantern light shows no movement. The temptation to rise and inspect everything returns, but you remain under the quilts. There is no use exhausting yourself each time the building murmurs. You begin to separate ordinary sounds from unusual ones. The stove ticks as iron expands and contracts. The fire makes a soft collapse when a charred piece of wood breaks apart. The chimney gives a faint hum when wind crosses its opening. Snow slides against the outer wall with a dry sigh. The mouse scratches twice, stops, and apparently reconsiders its evening plans. Settlers living in isolated cabins often depended upon sound as a practical warning system. Before electric lights, alarms, telephones, or reliable weather reports, a change in the voice of the stove, roof, livestock, wind, or nearby water could signal trouble. Familiar noises provided reassurance. A noise that did not belong demanded attention. You hear one now. It comes from outside. Beyond the wall near the door, a dull scrape, then another. You sit upright. The quilts fall from your shoulders, and cold air closes around your chest. You listen carefully. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. The noise might be snow shifting against the door. It might be a branch dragged by the wind. It might be an animal searching the wall for shelter. You lower your feet to the floor and reach for the lantern before you increase the flame. The sound stops. The silence afterward feels enormous. You wait long enough for your toes to grow cold. Nothing returns at last. You climb back into bed and tuck the blankets round your legs. Some accounts from western homesteads describe wolves, coyotes, foxes, and other animals approaching buildings during severe weather, drawn by food scraps, livestock, or simple protection from the wind. Most kept their distance from people, yet in darkness. Even a harmless creature can become whatever your imagination finds least relaxing. A peculiar frontier belief claimed that certain animals could sense an approaching storm long before humans noticed any change. Restless horses, unusually quiet birds, or animals seeking shelter were treated as signs. Modern research confirms that many creatures respond to pressure, temperature, and environmental shifts, though not always with the supernatural precision later stories grant them. Tonight, the animals require no special gift. The storm is difficult to miss. From far beyond the cabin comes a faint cry. It rises, bends, and fades. You cannot decide whether it belongs to a coyote, wind passing through timber, or some combination of both. Snow alters distance. A sound that seems close may come from a ridge away. While something beside the wall may seem strangely remote, you lie on your back and study the darkness above you. The buried roof removes any view of stars. The shutter blocks the window. No moonlight enters. Without the lantern, the cabin would be completely black. Darkness changes time. Minutes feel wider. You cannot glance at a glowing clock. You judge the night by the fire, your fatigue, and the intervals between waking. The world outside offers no visible horizon, only wind and pressure. Specialists still dispute how deeply prolonged winter isolation affected emotional health in remote households. Some letters describe peace, family closeness, and welcome rest after months of labour. Others reveal anxiety, irritability, loneliness, and a powerful hunger for news. The experience depended upon company, supplies, personality, weather, and whether the roof had recently made a noise resembling a tree falling into the room. You close your eyes. Immediately, the sounds become clearer. A tiny tap comes from the stovepipe. A grain of snow or ice may have struck the outer metal. The roof creaks again. This time, you do not move. You breathe in through your nose and out slowly. The air smells of pine smoke, wool, straw, and the remains of supper. Each familiar scent confirms where you are. The cabin is holding. The fire is burning. The chimney is drawing. The door remains barred. You repeat these facts silently, not as a prayer exactly, but as a list of things that are still true. A heavier rush moves across the roof. Snow slides down one slope, gathering speed for a second. The sound becomes a soft roar directly above you. Then a mass drops from the eave and lands beside the wall with a deep, padded thud. The bed frame trembles. You sit up again, heart beating faster. No beam breaks. No board falls. The stove flame remains steady. The roof has shed part of its burden. Relief moves through you, followed by the slightly embarrassing realization that the cabin has just performed necessary maintenance, while you lay beneath it imagining disaster. You settle down once more. Outside. Another distant call drifts through the trees. This one sounds more clearly like a coyote. A second voice answers from farther away. Coyotes use a remarkable range of yips, howls, barks, and calls. A small group can sound much larger because individual voices change pitch and overlap. The result carries across open country and often convinces a nervous listener that an entire army of coyotes has assembled for administrative purposes. You smile into the dark. The voices do not approach. They rise once more, then fade beneath the wind. Your body begins to grow heavier. The warmth beneath the quilts deepens. The rope bed supports your back with only a mild complaint. Even the bedbug bite at your ankle has softened into a distant itch. Then the fire gives a quiet crack. You open your eyes for a moment. You wonder whether you should rise and add wood. The stove still radiates heat. The room has not yet cooled. You decide to wait a little longer. This is how sleep comes in the buried cabin. Not as a clean surrender, but as a series of small permissions. You allow one creak to pass without investigation. You let one animal call fade without imagining its path. You trust the roof for another minute. You trust the stove for another breath. The darkness remains deep, and the storm continues beyond the walls, but its voice has softened into something almost rhythmic. Snow slides, timbers answer, the chimney hums, your breathing joins them. And somewhere between caution and exhaustion, you begin at last to drift. Somewhere between caution and exhaustion, you begin at last to drift. And in that fragile edge of sleep, the empty side of the bed feels unusually large. Tonight you have the cabin to yourself. In many frontier homes, that would be the exception rather than the rule. A small cabin rarely offers a room for each person. It may offer one room for everyone, along with a stove, table, tools, food stores, wet clothing, and whatever private thoughts can survive in such crowded company. Beds are shared because space is limited. Blankets are precious, and several bodies create warmth more efficiently than one. You imagine the same bed beneath you holding two sleepers, perhaps three. The ropes would sag more deeply. Straw would shift toward the centre. Each person would begin the night with a reasonable portion of mattress and wake to discover that geography has changed. You roll slightly onto your side. The bed frame creaks as if demonstrating the point. In a household of parents and children, sleeping arrangements depend upon age, health, custom, and necessity. Young children may share with parents or siblings. Older children may sleep together in another bed, on a trundle, on a pallet near the stove, or in a loft if the cabin has one. A visitor might receive the best place available, though the best place may still include a rolled coat for a pillow and a child who kicks with remarkable accuracy. Shared sleeping was common in many parts of the 19th century, especially where families were large and houses were small. Beds were expensive pieces of household equipment, and heated rooms were few. Crowding several sleepers into one space conserved both bedding and fuel. The practical sense is obvious. The social experience is more complicated. You picture lying beside another person beneath these quilts. At first, the extra warmth would be welcome. A body beside you warms the trapped air quickly. Cold feet find warmer territory. Shoulders press together. The bedding lifts less often, and drafts have fewer openings to enter. Then someone turns over. The quilt moves. Cold air pours down your neck. You reclaim the edge and discover that your companion has taken it back with a sleeping confidence unavailable during daylight. There is no polite conversation about this. Midnight negotiations occur through elbows, sighs, blanket pulling, and strategic use of the knees. Families learned one another's sleeping habits intimately. Someone snored, someone talked, someone ground teeth, someone rose repeatedly to tend an infant, check the stove, or use the chamber pot. A restless sleeper disturbed everyone. A quiet sleeper could still steal the blanket with impressive stealth. One odd household solution involved sewing loops or ties onto blankets so covers could be fastened more securely at the foot of the bed. This reduced slipping, though it did nothing about the person beside you rolling up inside the quilt like a very contented parcel. You hear the mouse move in the wall and imagine how much louder the cabin would feel with several people breathing in it. One breath would be deep and slow, another might whistle faintly through the nose, a child might cough, someone would murmur a name from a dream, the stove would still tick, but its voice would join a human chorus. Privacy, as you understand it now, would be difficult to find. Dressing happens near others, often behind a hanging cloth, a blanket, or the simple agreement that everyone will look elsewhere. Personal conversations wait for walks, chores, or moments when the room temporarily empties. Arguments cannot always retreat behind closed doors because there may be no other door. Researchers of family life continue to debate whether close sleeping arrangements created a stronger sense of intimacy or simply forced people to tolerate one another with greater discipline. Both may be true. Shared space can produce affection, irritation, comfort, and resentment within the same hour. You think of winter visitors. A traveller caught in a storm might be offered floor space, a bench, or part of a bed. Hospitality can become a matter of survival. Refusing shelter in severe weather may carry consequences far beyond awkwardness. The stranger brings cold clothing, snow, unfamiliar smells, and perhaps news from distant places. The household brings food, fire, and questions. Where are you coming from? How deep is the snow along the road? Have you seen the neighbour's cattle? Is the path still open? After supper, The stranger may sleep beside another adult because there is nowhere else. Personal boundaries adjust to conditions. The arrangement is practical, not necessarily intimate in the modern sense. You imagine an unfamiliar shoulder beside yours and an unfamiliar snore beginning just as you settle. The cabin suddenly feels smaller. Boarding houses, military quarters, mining camps, and inns often required men to share rooms or even beds, particularly when demand exceeded space, in some settings. Travellers of the same sex sharing a bed was ordinary and attracted little comment. The practice reflected cost, custom, and limited accommodation rather than romance. A cabin filled with workers might contain bunks stacked along a wall. Each bunk holds straw, blankets, boots beneath, and the personal possessions of someone who owns very little room. Damp socks hang near the stove, coats overlap on pegs. Morning begins when the first person rises, because everyone else soon hears it. You stretch your legs beneath the quilts and feel grateful that no one blocks your feet. Then the stove cools slightly. At once. Solitude becomes less attractive. Several sleepers would provide more heat, especially beneath shared covers. Human bodies produce steady warmth, and in a poorly insulated cabin that warmth matters. It does not heat the entire room like a stove, but within a bed it changes the night. Older relatives, infants, and sick family members receive special attention because they lose heat more easily or cannot manage bedding alone. Someone may wake to check a child's face, adjust a blanket, or bring the smallest sleeper closer. Domestic historians remain divided on how frequently entire families slept in a single bed. Since household records rarely describe nightly arrangements in detail, room size, bed count, family size, and oral testimony offer clues. But the exact pattern changes from one home to another. You imagine a mother listening through darkness for a baby's breathing. A father rises to feed the stove. An older child sleeps through both events. A younger child wakes and asks whether morning has arrived. No, not yet. The answer is whispered. Everyone settles again. That quiet exchange alters the feeling of the night. Danger remains outside, but responsibility is shared. One person hears the roof, another notices the fire, someone remembers the water bucket, someone else finds the mitten lost beneath the bed. Crowding carries its own risks. Illness spreads more easily in close rooms. Lice and bedbugs move freely through shared bedding. Smoke, dampness, and stale air affect everyone. Rest can be poor when many bodies compete for limited space. Yet isolation also has a cost. You understand that now as the cabin settles around you. There is no second person to confirm that the chimney sounds normal. No one to laugh at the mouse. No one to take the next turn with the stove. Every noise belongs to you. Every decision waits for you alone. The bed is wider, but the night is heavier. You turn onto your back and pull the quilt up to your chin. For a moment, you imagine the warmth of another sleeper nearby, not speaking, not moving, simply present. The thought is unexpectedly calming. Then you imagine the snoring. Solitude regains some of its charm. The stove gives another low crack, and you know that before long you must rise to feed it. In a crowded cabin, someone else might take this watch. Tonight, the duty remains yours. You close your eyes again, listening to the empty half of the bed, and understand why people once accepted crowded rooms, shared blankets, restless children, and the occasional midnight elbow. Warmth was only part of it. In winter, another breathing person could make the darkness feel less endless. In winter, another breathing person could make the darkness feel less endless. Though another breathing person would also make the morning wash considerably more complicated. Your eyes open before you're ready. The stove has settled into a low red glow, and the room has cooled enough for the tip of your nose to notice. Beneath the quilts, your body remains warm, outside them. The cabin waits with all the softness of a frozen bucket. For a few moments, you consider remaining exactly where you are. Then your bladder offers a firm historical reminder that comfort has limits. The chamber pot rests beneath the bed. You reach down, find the handle, and pull it closer. This is one of those household objects rarely shown in romantic paintings of frontier life. Artists prefer sunsets, horses, and determined faces looking toward opportunity. The chamber pot does not usually make the composition. It is practical, unavoidable, and much better than opening a buried door in the middle of a storm. You use it carefully beneath the protection of the quilts, then replace it beneath the bed, where the cold air will reduce the smell but not remove the problem. By morning, the contents may be partly frozen. This is unpleasant, certainly, yet it also makes carrying the pot outside somewhat less risky, assuming the doorway can be opened. Indoor chamber pots were common in homes long before modern plumbing, especially during cold nights when outdoor privies were distant, dark, or dangerous to reach in severe weather. Even households with a nearby privy often relied on pots, covered buckets, or other indoor containers until conditions improved. You lie back down and breathe through your nose. The cabin already holds a complicated mixture of scents: smoke from the stove, damp wool, old straw, leather, cooked onion, mouse, human sweat. The chamber pot adds its own modest opinion. The room is not filthy by frontier standards. It is simply lived in without ventilation, running water, or a cheerful bottle promising alpine freshness. Eventually, you rise. Cold air wraps around your shoulders as you leave the bed. You pull the quilt with you and shuffle toward the stove. One thick piece of wood remains near the firebox. You add it, open the draft, and wait for the embers to brighten. The iron begins to tick again. On the table sits the water bucket. A new layer of ice covers the surface. You break it with the ladle and pour a small amount into a basin. The water is painfully cold. You could heat it, but fuel is limited, and breakfast will need the stove soon. You place the basin near the warming iron for a few minutes, hoping to bring the water from hostile to merely discouraging. Washing in a frontier cabin is not usually a full-body event on a winter morning. It is selective: face, hands, neck, perhaps feet when necessary. The rest waits for warmer weather, a larger supply of water, or a moment when modesty and room temperature are both more cooperative. You wet a cloth and wring it out. The first touch to your face makes you inhale sharply. Cold water clears sleep with great efficiency. It also creates the immediate suspicion that cleanliness has been oversold. You wipe around your eyes, across your forehead, behind your ears, and along your neck. Soot marks the cloth. So does sweat from the walk and the long night beside the stove. You rinse it once, using as little water as possible. In many 19th century rural households, water had to be carried from wells, springs, creeks, pumps, or melted snow. Every basin represented labour. When water froze, the work increased. Heating it demanded more fuel. Hygiene therefore followed the limits of season, supply, and effort rather than a fixed daily ideal. You wash your hands more thoroughly, especially before handling food. Soap sits in a small dish near the basin. It is coarse, brown, and faintly greasy. Homemade soap was often produced from animal fat combined with lye derived from wood ashes. The process required care because strong lye could burn the skin. Finished soap varied in texture and quality. Some batches became firm bars, others remained soft and were stored in containers. You rub a little between your palms. It does not produce the rich foam expected by a modern advertisement. It creates a thin, slippery layer and a smell that suggests smoke, fat, and determination. You rinse your fingers and dry them on a cloth hanging near the stove. The cloth is not entirely clean. It is cleaner than your hands were. That is the frontier scale of improvement. One odd piece of household advice recommended rubbing snow onto stained fabric before washing, particularly when water was scarce. The snow could loosen surface dirt and absorb grease, though using it indoors meant creating another wet patch on the floor. You decide that the cabin already contains enough experimental moisture. Your clothing requires attention next. The coat has dried unevenly. The side facing the stove is warm and almost stiff. The far side remains damp. You turn it again. Your outer trousers smell of smoke and sweat. The wool shirt carries traces of supper and the long walk through snow. There is no washing these garments tonight. Instead, you brush them. A stiff bristle brush removes dried mud, loose dirt, ash, and some surface grime. You run it along the coat's sleeves, shoulders, and hem. Dust rises. Tiny crystals of dried snow fall to the boards. Brushing clothing was an important part of care when washing large wool garments was difficult. Frequent full washing could shrink, distort, or weaken certain fabrics, while drying them in winter took time and space. Airing, beating, brushing, and spot cleaning extended their useful life. You hold the wool shirt near the stove and inspect the underarms. There are moments in history when scholarship becomes unnecessary. The shirt needs air. You hang it from a peg, then pull your waistcoat tighter over the linen layer. The cabin is private, which simplifies the arrangement in a crowded household. Changing clothes would involve blankets used as screens, turned backs, carefully timed movements, or a shared agreement not to notice anything. Those who study everyday cleanliness still disagree about whether modern descriptions exaggerate how dirty frontier settlers were. Standards differed, certainly, and full bathing was less frequent, especially in winter. Yet people washed hands and faces, changed underclothing when possible, brushed garments, laundered linens, cleaned floors, and used perfumes or herbs. Limited water did not mean complete indifference. You sweep the floor around the bed. The broom is made from bundled twigs tied to a handle. It gathers straw fragments, crumbs, ash, and mouse droppings into a small pile. You push the debris into a metal pan and set it aside for disposal once the door can be opened. The room looks slightly better. It does not smell much better. You lift the chamber pot and inspect the lid. A covered vessel is a blessing in a single-room cabin. You place it near the door. Far from the stove and food, heat would only encourage it to become more expressive. Next, you check the bedding. The quilts have absorbed the scent of your body and the smoky air. You shake them gently, then fold them back so the straw mattress can breathe. In dry weather, bedding might be carried outside and aired in sunlight. Sun and cold could freshen fabric and discourage some pests. Today, carrying the mattress into the storm would merely produce a very clean-looking snowdrift with a bed hidden inside it. You smooth the straw tick and inspect the seams for insects. One dark speck moves near a patch. You remove it with the edge of a spoon and drop it into the hot stove. The spoon, having already served as a shutter brace and kitchen tool, now adds pest control to its resume. You wipe the table with the remaining basin water. Grease from supper lifts slowly. A little ash sprinkled on the cloth helps scrub the surface, though too much leaves grey streaks. The water grows cloudy. Nothing is wasted yet. You use the final amount to dampen the broom and collect fine dust near the stove. Then you pour the dirty water into a covered waste bucket. The cabin remains smoky, crowded with smells, and far from sterile. But your face is cleaner, your hands are washed, the food surface has been wiped, the floor is swept, the bedding is open to the air. Small acts create order where comfort is limited. You return to the stove and warm your fingers above the iron. The room still carries every trace of the night, but it no longer feels neglected. Cleanliness here is not about perfection. It is about keeping dirt, dampness, insects, waste, and illness from gaining too much ground before the weather allows something better. You breathe in the mixture of soap, smoke, wool, and pine. It is not fresh. It is manageable. And in a cabin buried beneath Montana snow, manageable is often another word for success, and in a cabin buried beneath Montana snow, manageable is often another word for success. Once the floor is swept and the basin set aside, the room settles into a quieter rhythm. There is no daylight to guide you. The shutter remains closed, the window is covered, and the snow outside presses its pale weight against the glass. Morning may be approaching, or it may still be hours away. You have only the stove, the lantern, your own hunger, and the slow movement of fatigue to tell you where you are in the night. You glance toward the mantel, though there is no clock. A clock would be useful, but it would not change the weather. It would only inform you more precisely how long you've been uncomfortable. Time in the cabin is measured by tasks. A log burns down, coffee water begins to tremble, a candle shortens, the room cools, you rise, move, mend, listen, and sit again. Before cheap clocks became common in rural households, many people judged time by sunlight, meal routines, church bells, animal behaviour, and familiar patterns of work. Mechanical clocks existed, certainly, but they could be expensive, fragile, and difficult to repair in isolated places. A household might own one treasured clock, or none at all. Tonight, the storm has removed the sun from the arrangement. You take the lantern from the table and inspect its oil. The level is dropped. You turn the wick lower until the flame becomes small enough to conserve fuel while still giving light. The room contracts around it. You choose a chair near the stove and bring over the wool stocking that dried earlier. One toe has begun to thin. The yarn is not yet broken, but another day of walking could push it through. A small sewing basket rests on the shelf. Inside are needles, thread, a wooden thimble, scraps of cloth, and several short lengths of yarn wound around a card. You select a needle and thread it with difficulty. Your fingers are warmer now, though the dim light makes the eye of the needle seem determined to move whenever the thread approaches. After several attempts, the thread passes through. You turn the stocking inside out and begin to reinforce the weak place with small loops of yarn. Mending is not merely thrift, it is preparation. A hole in a stocking becomes a blister. A torn mitten becomes a numb hand. A loose button becomes an open coat in driving wind. Repairing clothing beside the stove may feel ordinary, but ordinary labour often prevents extraordinary misery. You work slowly, letting the rhythm calm you. Needle in, yarn through, pull gently, turn the cloth, repeat. The wind continues beyond the logs, but your attention narrows to the shape forming beneath your hands. Those who examine household labour often point out that much of survival depended on repetitive work that rarely appeared in heroic frontier stories. Sewing, preserving food, tending children, washing cloth, nursing illness, maintaining fires, and repairing tools filled countless hours. These tasks lacked dramatic scenery, yet a household could not endure without them. You finish the stocking and inspect the repair. It is not beautiful. It will hold. You place it beside the stove and choose another task. A shirt button hangs loose by 2 threads. You tighten it, knot the thread, and bite off the excess. The cabin is still silent enough that the small snap sounds loud. Once the repairs are done, you have fewer reasons to remain awake. That is when the mind begins to wander. In a family cabin, someone might tell a story. It could be a Bible story, a local tale, a memory of another country, a warning about foolish travellers, or an account of something that happened to a relative whose common sense improved only after the event. Oral storytelling carried history, humour, belief, and practical knowledge. Stories explained dangerous places, remembered absent family members, entertained children, and made long evenings feel shorter. Some changed with every telling. A storm grew deeper, a bear grew larger, a grandfather became wiser. Human memory is generous that way. You imagine another voice near the stove. Perhaps it tells of a traveller who mistakes a snow-covered roof for a hill and walks across it, only to hear a family shouting beneath his boots. Similar tales appear in many snowy regions. Some may be true, others may be jokes repeated until they acquire the warmth of truth. A curious winter amusement involved making shadow figures on the wall with fingers, spoons, tools, and scraps of paper. Children could watch birds, rabbits, wolves, or monsters appear in lantern light. Adults might pretend the game was only for the children while taking suspicious care to improve the wolf. You lift one hand between the lantern and the wall. Your fingers create a crooked animal shape. It could be a rabbit. It could be a mouse with social ambitions. You move the fingers once, watch the shadow leap across the logs, and lower your hand before loneliness persuades you to begin a full theatrical performance. Cards might pass the time in a larger group. So might checkers, guessing games, riddles, reading aloud, singing, or carving small objects from wood. A deck of cards occupies little space and survives many journeys. Though certain households disapprove of gambling or card play on religious grounds, some families mark winter evenings with prayer. You picture everyone gathering near the stove while one person reads from a worn Bible or prayer book. The language may be formal, but the concerns are immediate. Keep the roof strong, protect the animals, guide anyone still on the road, preserve the food, bring mourning. Religion offers more than doctrine in such a moment. It gives shape to fear. It turns private worry into shared words and places the storm inside a larger story. Observers of frontier spirituality continue to differ over how closely private practice matched public declarations of faith. Church attendance could be irregular because distances were great, ministers scarce, and weather severe. Yet households still prayed, sang hymns, read scripture, and carried beliefs through daily routines. You do not sing. The cabin acoustics do not require encouragement. Instead, you sit quietly and listen to the stove. The flame has settled into a steady murmur. The sound resembles low conversation. You understand how people begin speaking to objects in isolation. The stove is already temperamental, demanding, and warm. It has most of the qualities required for companionship. You pour a little hot water over the remaining dried apple pieces and let them soften. The cup warms your hands. You sip slowly. The sweetness is weak but comforting. As the minutes pass, you create your own ritual. First, you check the door bar, then the chimney draught, then the wood pile, then the water, then the bedding. You perform the same circuit again later, not because anything has changed, but because repetition creates certainty. The bar is still secure, the fire still breathes, the roof still holds, the supplies remain where you placed them. Ritual reduces a wide, dangerous night into a series of familiar movements. You cannot command the storm, but you can place the shovel correctly. You cannot know the hour, but you can prepare the next log. You cannot see the road, but you can keep the lantern ready. The candle, forgotten near the wall, has burned lower. Wax gathers in a pale ridge around its base. You watch the flame bend slightly whenever the stove draws air through the room. There is your clock. Not an accurate one, perhaps, but an honest one. The flame tells you that air moves. The stove tells you that fuel remains. Your body tells you that sleep is returning. You fold the repaired shirt and stocking, place the needle safely in the basket, and close the lid. Losing a needle in the bedding would add unnecessary excitement to the night. Then you take one final slow walk around the cabin. Every object has become familiar now. The table, the broom, the food box, the long pole, the shovel, the coat drying beside the stove, the bed waiting in shadow. Earlier, the room felt strange. Now it holds the shape of your habits. You lower the lantern again and stand beside the bed. The night is still long, but it no longer feels empty. It has been divided into stitches, sips, checks, stories imagined, prayers unspoken, and small acts of order. Outside, the storm continues without any interest in the hour. Inside, you create time by what you choose to do with it. Outside, the storm continues without any interest in the hour. Inside, you stand beside the bed and become aware of everything that might be waiting beyond the door. The cabin has protected you so well that the outside world now feels almost imaginary. You cannot see the trees. You cannot see the slope. You cannot see the trail you followed. Snow has buried the window and pressed against the walls until the building seems less like a house and more like a warm pocket inside the earth. Yet the world remains there. The wind continues moving across open ground. Trees bend beneath accumulated snow. Animals search for shelter and food. Drifts deepen around fences, sheds, and hollows. Somewhere, perhaps not far away, another traveller may be facing the same white darkness without a roof overhead. You check the door bar again. It has not moved. The shovel still waits beside it, tied to the wall peg. The long pole leans nearby. These objects are reassuring because they offer the possibility of action. Whether that action will be enough is another question. A heavy roof slide comes from above. Snow rushes down the slope of the cabin, strikes the ground beside the wall, and settles with a deep impact. The sound seems to pass through the floorboards. You glance toward the rafters. Nothing breaks. Still, the load above concerns you. Snow does not weigh the same under all conditions. Fresh powder may be light and airy. Wind-packed snow is denser. Snow warmed by a brief thaw can absorb water and become far heavier. A roof that easily carries one storm may struggle after several layers accumulate. Frontier builders often reinforced roofs with thick ridgepoles, closely spaced rafters, and interior supports when heavy winter snow was expected. Even so, structures required inspection and occasional clearing. A roof built quickly during autumn might reveal every shortcut when winter settled upon it. You place your palm against the upright support again. The timber feels solid. A faint vibration travels through it as the wind presses outside, then fades. Specialists continue to disagree about how frequently settlers deliberately chose cabin sites with avalanche danger in mind. Some understood local slopes, prevailing winds, and snow movement very well. Others arrived with limited experience, selected land for water or timber, and learned the behaviour of winter only after the first severe season. You imagine the hillside above the cabin. During your approach, visibility was too poor to study it carefully. The ground rose behind the roof, and snow had already filled the space between the slope and the rear wall. If the hill is gentle, the snow may simply accumulate. If it is steep enough, a slab could break loose and move. An avalanche need not be enormous to damage a small structure. Even a compact mass of snow can block exits, crush a wall, bend a chimney, or fill the surrounding area so deeply that digging becomes exhausting. You listen for a distant rumble. There is only wind. Then comes a soft cracking sound from somewhere outside. Your body stiffens. The noise might be a branch breaking under snow. It might be ice splitting along a creek. It might be a tree trunk shifting. The cabin gives you sound without explanation. A curious belief found in some mountain communities held that loud shouting could trigger avalanches. Sound alone is usually far less important than unstable snow. Added weight, weather changes, or movement across a slope. Still, the idea encouraged people to speak softly in dangerous country, which would suit this bedtime story rather well. You remain quiet anyway. Another threat lies lower than the roof. Livestock, if kept nearby, may be trapped in a shed or corral. Horses, cattle, sheep, or goats require food, water and protection. Deep snow blocks movement and covers grazing ground. Frozen troughs must be opened. Roofs over barns carry the same burden as the cabin roof, often across a much wider space. You have heard no animals. That could mean there are none. It could also mean the snow has swallowed their voices. In many Western households, winter survival depended as much upon protecting animals as protecting people. A family could endure personal discomfort and still face ruin if valuable stock froze, starved, wandered away, or became injured. Animals provided transport, meat, milk, hides, labour, and future income. Their loss could change the prospects of an entire household. You imagine waking to find a horse missing from its shelter. Tracks would vanish quickly in blowing snow. Searching would expose you to the same conditions that cause the animal to stray. Every decision would carry a cost. The thought makes you check the rope once more. It remains tied beside the shovel. Rope can guide a person between a cabin and a nearby outbuilding when visibility collapses. One end stays fixed to the shelter, the other is carried outward, allowing you to follow the line back through snow and wind. Without it, a few yards can become enough distance to lose direction. Stories survive of people becoming disoriented within sight of their own homes. Some wandered in circles. Others reached a barn and could not find the return path. Flat white ground, blowing snow, and darkness remove the landmarks the mind expects. You remember your own arrival. The roof appeared only when you were close. Had you passed several yards to one side, the cabin might have remained invisible. Far beyond the walls, a branch snaps loudly. This time, a second sound follows, a rushing descent through smaller limbs, then a padded crash. Snow falls from a tree, or part of the tree falls with it. You wait for movement against the cabin. None comes. A large tree near a house can offer shade, timber, and shelter from wind. But under heavy snow it can become a hazard. Limbs break, roots loosen, trunks fall. A roof already carrying snow has little interest in receiving a pine tree as an additional guest. You picture the surrounding forest, each tree bending slightly beneath its burden. There is nothing you can do about them tonight. That truth is difficult. Modern life often offers a button, a telephone, a warning system, or someone trained to answer. Here, danger may be recognized without being controllable. You prepare, observe, and wait. The possibility of another traveller troubles you most. Someone could be outside now, following a creek or fence line, hoping to find shelter. The cabin is buried deeply enough that its light cannot be seen. Only smoke might reveal it, and the storm could tear that away immediately. You wonder whether you should make noise. A bell, a gunshot, or repeated calls might guide someone nearby. They might also waste energy, frighten animals, or accomplish nothing in the wind. Writers studying rescue accounts offer different interpretations of how often isolated households risk themselves to aid strangers during storms. Many stories celebrate remarkable courage and hospitality. Other cases show people remaining inside because leaving would create 2 victims instead of 1. You stand near the door and listen. No knock comes, no voice, only the soft pressure of snow against the wood. You understand that fear in the cabin does not always arrive as panic. More often, it arrives as imagination performing practical work. It identifies the weak roof, the blocked door, the missing traveller, the hungry animals, and the unstable slope. Some of those concerns keep you alive, others merely keep you awake. You return to the bed and sit on its edge. The rope foundation bends beneath your weight, the quilts wait, holding a little warmth. The stove burns steadily, and the roof remains overhead. You cannot inspect the hill, you cannot clear every drift, you cannot search the forest in darkness. You can keep the fire alive. You can keep the air moving. You can keep the tools ready for this hour. That must be enough. You lie down and pull the quilt over your shoulders. Beyond the door, danger remains possible. Within the cabin, survival remains present, and between those two truths, you close your eyes and listen for the first quiet signs that the storm may finally be weakening. Between those two truths, you close your eyes and listen for the first quiet signs that the storm may finally be weakening. At some point, without ceremony, the sound changes. The wind no longer presses against the cabin in one unbroken force. It arrives in softer gusts with pauses between them. Snow still shifts along the roof, but the rushing slides have become less frequent. The chimney hums steadily rather than shuddering beneath sudden pressure. You wake because the room has cooled. The stove has fallen low again, and darkness fills the cabin beyond the faint red glow visible through the vent. Your nose feels cold. Your feet are still warm beneath the quilts, but the air around your face has sharpened. You lie still for several breaths. Morning may have arrived, though the buried window offers no proof. There is only a subtle difference in the darkness, a sense that the blackness behind the shutter has thinned toward grey. You leave the bed. The floorboards feel brutal through your socks. You find your boots beside the stove and discover that one remains slightly damp inside. You pull them on anyway, then wrap the quilt around your shoulders while feeding kindling into the firebox. The embers respond slowly. You add bark, then thin wood, then a split piece of pine. Flame appears in a narrow line and begins climbing. The stove ticks awake. Heat will take time, but the promise of it changes the room. Before breakfast, before coffee, before anything resembling comfort, you must inspect the vents. You hold the scrap of paper near the stove door. It leans inward, showing that the chimney still draws. The candle flame also bends toward the stove when you light it. Good. You move to the threshold and feel for the small air gap you left during the night. It is gone. Snow has packed tightly against the lower door, sealing the opening from outside. The stove still breathes through cracks elsewhere. But the loss of that vent could become dangerous if the fire grows stronger. You take the long pole and place its tip against the upper part of the door. Then you push. The pole meets resistance almost immediately. Snow lies deep against the entrance. You test higher, still blocked. Only near the top corner does the pole travel farther before striking dense material. The drift has covered most of the doorway. Cabins in severe snow country often required regular digging to keep exits, windows, chimneys, and livestock shelters accessible. This was not optional housekeeping. A blocked door could trap occupants, while a covered chimney or vent could turn a warm room hazardous. You remove the wooden bar and set it aside. The door opens inward a few inches before packed snow stops it. Loose powder pours through the gap onto the floor. Cold air rushes around your ankles and moves toward the stove. The flame brightens immediately. You close the door again. At least you know the air beyond is reachable. Now comes the work. You tie one end of the rope around your waist and secure the other to the interior wall peg. The shovel remains attached with its own shorter cord. You pull on the coat, scarf, mittens, and cap. Every layer that felt excessive beside the stove now seems entirely sensible. You open the door slowly. Snow slumps inward, forming a pale mound across the threshold. You use the shovel from inside, cutting small blocks from the packed face and dragging them into the room. This feels wrong. You are deliberately bringing snow into the cabin you worked so carefully to keep dry. Yet there is no other way to create space for the door. You pile the snow into the large pot, then into the waste bucket, then onto a folded scrap of canvas. Some will melt and provide water. The rest must wait until you can throw it outside. The door opens another few inches. You dig again. The packed snow is heavier than the powder you crossed during the storm. Wind has pressed the crystals together. Each shovel load has weight. Your shoulders begin to ache. Warmth gathers beneath your coat, and you slow down to avoid sweating. One uncommon technique in deeply buried shelters involved cutting a small upward tunnel rather than forcing a full doorway immediately. The narrow opening allowed air and gave the digger a sense of snow depth before committing energy to a larger passage. It also reduced the amount of snow collapsing indoors, assuming the tunnel ceiling held. You use the long pole to test the drift above the door. The tip suddenly breaks through. A tiny circle of pale light appears. Morning. The sight is so simple and so welcome that you pause with one hand on the pole. Grey daylight enters through the hole thin as thread. You widen it carefully with the shovel handle. Fresh air pours in. It smells astonishingly clean. Carrying pine, cold mineral snow, and the faint scent of open distance. You breathe too deeply and cough after hours of smoke, wool, food, and stale warmth. The outside air feels almost sharp enough to taste. Analysts of winter survival records remain divided over how early isolated households usually began clearing after major storms. Some accounts suggest immediate work before drifts hardened. Others describe people waiting for winter ease, conserving strength, and trusting that insulation would protect them until digging became safer. The correct choice depended on temperature, snow texture, health, fuel, and the condition of the roof. You begin shaping a tunnel upward from the doorway. It is not graceful work. You crawl, shovel, retreat, and push loose snow behind you. The rope slides along the floor and tightens against your waist whenever you move farther. The tunnel is barely wide enough for your shoulders. Snow presses close around your head. The interior is pale blue in the morning light. Tiny crystals sparkle along the sides. Your breathing sounds loud inside the narrow space. You pause often. The tunnel ceiling settles with faint sighs. Each sound reminds you not to widen it carelessly. You remove snow from the upper section first, allowing loose material to fall where you can control it. At last, the shovel breaks through the outer crust. Light floods the tunnel. You push upward and create an opening large enough to raise your head into the open air. The storm has passed. Clouds still cover much of the sky, but the wind has weakened to a restless breeze. Snow surrounds this cabin in sculpted waves. The door lies several feet below the new surface. Only the chimney and part of the roof remain clearly visible. You pull yourself slightly higher and look around. Trees stand bent and heavy. Some branches have broken. A young pine nearby has disappeared almost entirely beneath a drift, with only its top visible like a green brush. The trail is gone. The world has no tracks, no road, no fence line, only smooth white forms stretching between the timber. You turn toward the roof. Snow lies thickest along the sheltered side. Part of it slid during the night. Leaving a curved edge near the chimney, the pipe remains upright. A dark ring around the cap shows where heat preserved an opening. You take the long pole and carefully clear loose snow near the chimney without striking the metal. The task must be done gently. Damaging the pipe would exchange one danger for another. Then you test the roof load from the edge of the tunnel. You do not climb onto it. You use the pole to loosen a small section where snow can slide safely away from the doorway. A heavy sheet moves with a deep whisper and drops beside the wall. The cabin creaks once, then becomes still. You inspect the landscape for signs of movement. No human tracks, no animal trail close to the cabin, no smoke from another shelter within view. The isolation feels larger in daylight. You call once. Your voice travels across the snow and returns faintly from the trees. No one answers. You listen for livestock. Nothing. Perhaps there are none nearby. Perhaps they shelter beyond the ridge. You cannot search until the entrance is secure and the cabin remains ventilated. You widen the tunnel enough to stand at the opening, then you mark it with a bright cloth that once hung beside the door. You tie the cloth to the long pole and plant it upright in the drift. The red fabric moves gently in the breeze. From a distance, it may reveal that a cabin lies beneath the snow. It may guide you back if weather returns. It is a small signal against a very large white landscape. You descend into the tunnel and continue clearing. Each shovel load brings more daylight toward the door. The entrance gradually emerges as a dark rectangle beneath the snow wall. You cut steps into the packed floor so you can climb without slipping. When the opening is large enough, you carry the accumulated indoor snow outside on the canvas and throw it beyond the tunnel mouth. The cabin floor becomes visible again. Cold air flows freely through the doorway, and the stove draws with a strong, steady sound. You leave the entrance partly open while checking the chimney from inside once more. Everything holds. Only then do you allow yourself to heat water. The pot goes onto the stove. Coffee follows. Steam rises in the cleaner air. You sit on the threshold step, half inside the cabin and half inside the snow tunnel. Morning light touches your face. Behind you. The stove warms the room. Ahead. The buried world waits beneath silence. The storm has changed everything around the cabin. It has covered roots, bent trees, sealed doors, and erased all signs of yesterday. But the roof remains, the chimney remains, the fire remains. And now, with a shovel beside you and daylight pouring through the tunnel, you begin the long practical work of returning the cabin to the world. You begin the long practical work of returning the cabin to the world, though the world itself seems in no hurry to return. Morning spreads slowly across the snow, the clouds thin from iron grey to pearl, and a quiet brightness settles over the buried roof. There is no warm sunrise yet, only a growing clarity that reveals how completely the storm has remade the land. You stand at the mouth of the tunnel with coffee warming your hands. Steam rises from the cup and disappears into the cold. Behind you, the cabin door remains open just enough to admit fresh air. The stove draws strongly, and its smoke rises through the cleared chimney in a narrow blue column. The smoke moves upward rather than sideways. The wind is easing. You listen. Water drips somewhere beneath the roof edge. Only one drop at first, then another. The sun has not appeared, but the temperature is beginning to shift. Snow nearest the warm chimney softens. Ice along the roof absorbs heat from the smoke, the cabin, and the brightening sky. You place the cup beside the doorway and take up the shovel again. The tunnel must be widened before the snow settles into a harder crust. You remove packed blocks from the sides, cutting carefully so the walls do not collapse inward. Each load lands outside with a soft thump. Your shoulders ache from the night's work. Muscles stiffen whenever you pause. Still, daylight makes the labour feel different in darkness. Digging was escape. Now it is recovery. You clear enough space for the door to open fully. Snow remains piled above it, forming a white arch from outside. The entrance resembles the mouth of a small cave. With the cabin hidden behind it, you step away and study the roof. The sun finally breaks through a thin place in the clouds. Light touches the snow and scatters in every direction. The brightness makes you narrow your eyes. Every surface shines. Shadows beneath the trees turn blue. Ice crystals sparkle across the drifts like countless tiny mirrors. After hours inside the dim cabin, the world appears almost too beautiful to trust. Snow blindness was a serious danger for travellers and workers exposed to intense light reflected from snow. Darkened goggles, veils, narrow eye coverings, and improvised shades were used in many northern regions to reduce glare. Without protection, prolonged exposure could inflame the eyes and temporarily damage vision. You pull your cap lower and tie a strip of cloth across your brow, leaving a narrow opening for your eyes. It makes you look mysterious. It also makes the shovel harder to see. You adjust the cloth until usefulness defeats mystery. The roof still carries a deep layer. You work from the ground with the long pole, loosening only the sections that can slide away safely. Snow descends in slow sheets, breaking apart as it falls. Each release lightens the burden on the rafters. You keep well clear of the falling mass. Being buried by the snow you're attempting to remove would be an impressively circular conclusion to the night. A final section slips from the rear roof and lands with a muffled crash. Beneath it, dark wooden shingles appear for the first time. The cabin is becoming visible again. You uncover the upper window frame next. Snow clings firmly to the glass, so you use your mitten rather than the shovel. A careless strike could break the pane, replacing one temporary problem with a winter of permanent ventilation when the snow falls away. Light enters the room through the frosted glass. Inside, the effect is immediate. The table emerges from shadow. The quilts show their faded colours. Dust turns slowly in the beam. The cabin no longer depends entirely upon lantern flame. You open the shutter from within the room. The window frames a wall of snow cut by a small patch of blue sky. It is not much of a view, but after the sealed darkness, it feels grand. Some mountain households created raised winter paths between buildings, packing snow beneath boots, sleds, or wooden tools until the route became firm. These paths could rise higher as the season continued, sometimes placing walkers strangely close to windows or roof edges. Spring then revealed fences, tools, and lower structures that had disappeared for months. You begin such a path now. From the tunnel entrance, you stamp a route toward a nearby wood stack partly hidden beneath a drift. Each step sinks at first. You return along the same line, pressing the snow down. After several passes, the path begins to hold your weight. The woodpile appears beneath a rough covering of canvas. Snow has protected some of it from wind, but moisture has entered along one edge. You uncover the driest logs and carry an armful back to the cabin. The supply inside no longer seems quite so alarming. You stack the new wood near the wall, leaving space for air to move around it. The room smells sharply of fresh, cold pine. Next, you search the immediate area for damage. A branch has fallen near the rear corner but missed the roof. The chimney cap is slightly bent, though still open. One section of roof covering has shifted. The doorframe remains firm. No wall logs have moved. The cabin survived. Researchers continue to offer different views on why some frontier structures endured extreme weather while others failed. Careful craftsmanship mattered, so did timber quality, maintenance, location, snow texture, wind direction, and luck. Survival stories often praise human determination, but a sound ridge beam deserves its share of the credit. You rest one mitten against the outer wall. The logs are cold and wet where snow has fallen away. Meltwater runs along the grain and freezes again in shaded grooves. The chinking remains mostly intact. You remember the tiny drafts that entered when you arrived. Now they seem almost friendly. By midday, the sky clears further, sunlight strengthens. The upper surfaces of the drift soften. They crust as passing clouds change the temperature. The landscape begins making small sounds. Water ticks from the eaves. Snow settles with gentle sighs. Branches release their burdens in powdery cascades. Far away, a raven calls. The voice is rough, confident, and wonderfully alive. You answer without thinking. The raven does not reply. It has standards. A strange custom in some isolated communities involved leaving small offerings of food for ravens or other birds after storms, partly from affection and partly because their movement could reveal open ground, carcasses, travellers, or changes in weather. The birds were not reliable messengers, but their presence made an empty landscape feel inhabited. You scatter a few crumbs beyond the doorway. The raven remains in a tree, watching with their professional caution of a creature that has survived many winters without trusting humans. You return inside. The cabin is warmer now, not because the stove burns harder, but because sunlight enters through the window. You remove your coat, then the scarf. The room feels almost spacious, with the door fully usable and daylight reaching the far wall. You empty the chamber pot outside in a place well away from the path and water source. You carry out the sweepings, shake the bedding in the cold sunlight, and hang the damp clothing where fresh air can reach it. The quilts lift and fall in the light breeze. For the first time, you see their patterns clearly. Patches that seemed brown in lantern light reveal muted green, blue, and red. Each piece appears worn, but together they remain strong. The bedbugs will not appreciate the sunlight. You feel no sympathy. You turn the straw tick and let the cold air pass through it. The mouse watches from a gap near the roof, perhaps concerned by this sudden enthusiasm for housekeeping. Then you sit on the doorstep with another cup of coffee. The storm has not vanished. Its evidence surrounds you in every direction. Roads remain buried. Travel may be impossible for days. Another snowfall could arrive before the ground clears, but the immediate danger has softened. The roof is lighter. The chimney breathes. The door opens. The woodpile is reachable. The cabin has returned from beneath the snow. You look across the white country and think of all the winter mornings that left no written record, no famous battle, no grand speech, no official document, only people digging doors open, feeding animals, drying socks, clearing chimneys, and discovering that the roof had held. Social history often lives in such moments. A repaired mitten, a shared bed, a cup of weak coffee, a bright rag marking a buried entrance, a spoon serving 3 professions before breakfast. These details are small, yet they reveal how survival actually feels. It rarely feels heroic while it is happening. It feels repetitive, uncomfortable, and necessary. You remember the long approach through the storm, when the cabin was only a dark shape beyond the snow. You remember the first flame, the onion in the pan, the tightening of the rope bed, the mouse on the beam, and the roof releasing its load in the darkness. Every action led to this quiet morning. You did not conquer winter, you negotiated with it. You gave the firewood, you gave the cabin attention, you gave the storm time to pass. Now sunlight rests across the threshold, and meltwater falls from the eaves with a slow, steady rhythm. You lean back against the log wall for this moment. There is nothing urgent to do. The tools are nearby. The stove is steady. The coffee is warm. The raven finally descends to inspect the crumbs. You watch it hop across the snow, tilting its dark head from side to side. It takes one piece, then another, and flies toward the trees. Its wings beat twice, then it glides. The sound fades into the clear air. You remain on the threshold, breathing gently, feeling sunlight across your face and warmth from the cabin behind you. The night has passed. The shelter remains, and the land, hidden only hours ago beneath wind and darkness, opens again in soft white silence. You can let the shovel rest now. You can let your shoulders loosen. The cold remains, but it no longer seems to be moving toward you. It simply exists across the hills and trees, calm beneath the pale afternoon light, inside. The quilts have dried, the straw has warmed, the stove gives a low, contented murmur. You return to the bed and sit down carefully. The ropes stretch beneath you. Familiar now. You remove your boots and place them near the stove. Dry wool closes softly around your feet. The cabin smells of pine, sunlight, cooling coffee, and clean winter air. You pull one quilt across your lap. Outside, a drop falls from the eave, then another. Each one marks the slow beginning of release. Snow becomes water. Darkness becomes morning. Fear becomes memory, and the cabin, which seemed almost swallowed by the land, become the home again. Your eyes grow heavy. There is no need to listen so sharply now. The roof has spoken all night, and it has nothing more to prove. The chimney breathes without struggle. The door stands free. The mouse has returned to its hidden corner. Even the wind has lowered its voice. You lie back upon the straw mattress and allow the quilt to settle over you. Sunlight reaches the wall beside the bed, soft and pale, while the stove holds a deep, even warmth. Your breathing slows. The long night moves farther away with every breath. The snow outside is no longer a wall. It is only snow. The cabin is no longer a trap. It is only shelter, and you're no longer struggling through darkness toward a distant door. You are here, warm enough, safe enough, resting beneath strong beams while the Montana winter softens beyond the glass. Let the sounds grow quieter now. Let the dripping water fade. Let the stove become a gentle pulse in the room. The quilts rest lightly across your shoulders, and the straw beneath you gives one final, peaceful rustle. Nothing more is required. The path can wait. The wood can wait. The distant world can wait. For now. There is only the slow warmth of the cabin, the pale light on the wall, and the soft silence that follows a storm. Your hands relax. Your jaw loosens. Your thoughts drift like the last loose crystals moving across the roof, and as the cabin settles into the snow, you settle into sleep, calm, sheltered, and carried gently toward dreams, sweet dreams